Claire Holloway stood in the basement of what should have been her home, trembling as her stepmother forced a wedding veil over her face. "You'll marry him instead," Margaret hissed, shoving her toward the black cars waiting outside. The groom was Damian Cross, the most feared mafia boss in America, a man rumored to be as ruthless as he was broken, confined to a wheelchair, and hungry for revenge. Claire believed she was being thrown to a monster to save a family that had never loved her. She was wrong about everything. If you want to see how far Claire's journey takes her, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The rain came down in sheets the night Claire's world finally shattered. She stood in the mansion's cold, stone-floored kitchen, her hands raw and cracked from scrubbing the same marble countertops her mother had once touched with gentle, loving fingers. That was a lifetime ago. Before the cancer. Before her father's heart gave out from grief 6 months later. Before Margaret Holloway and her daughter Sabrina moved in like vultures and turned Claire's childhood home into her prison. "Claire!" The shriek echoed down from the second floor. "Get up here, now!" Claire wiped her hands on her apron, the same threadbare thing she'd worn for 3 years, and climbed the servants' stairs. Not the grand staircase she'd descended as a child in Sunday dresses. Those steps were forbidden to her now. Margaret stood in the hallway outside Sabrina's suite, her face flushed with rage and something else. Fear. Real, bone-deep terror that Claire had never seen before. "Get in here!" Margaret grabbed Claire's arm with manicured nails that bit through the thin fabric of her sleeve and dragged her into Sabrina's bedroom. The room was chaos. Drawers hung open, empty. The closet doors gaped wide, showing bare hangers swinging in the draft. Sabrina's prized perfume bottles, her jewelry boxes, her collection of designer shoes, all gone. "Where is she?" Margaret's voice cracked. "Where did that stupid girl go?" Claire shook her head, genuinely confused. "I don't know. I've been in the kitchen all evening." "Don't lie to me." Margaret's hand connected with Claire's cheek, the slap echoing in the empty room. "You must have seen something." Claire tasted blood where her teeth had cut into her lip, but she kept her voice steady. Years of this treatment had taught her that showing pain only made it worse. "I haven't seen Sabrina since breakfast." Margaret released her with a shove that sent Claire stumbling into the dresser. The older woman's hand shook as she pulled a folded paper from her pocket. Claire watched her stepmother's eyes scan the page, watched the color drain from her already pale face. That ungrateful, selfish little... Margaret crumpled the note in her fist. "She's gone. Run off with that artist boyfriend I told her to stop seeing. Left me here to..." She cut herself off, but Claire saw something pass over her stepmother's features. A calculation. A terrible, desperate idea taking shape. "What's happened?" Claire asked quietly. Margaret's laugh was bitter and sharp. "What's happened? Your father, may he rot for his stupidity, borrowed money from very dangerous people to keep his precious company afloat during his final year. When he died, the debt didn't die with him. I've been making payments, selling off everything not nailed down, but it's not enough. It's never enough." Claire's stomach dropped. She'd wondered why the antiques had slowly disappeared, why the art had been taken down from the walls, why the staff had been dismissed one by one until only she remained to do the work of 10 people. "How much do you owe?" "More than this house is worth, more than everything we have left." Margaret's eyes fixed on Claire with an intensity that made her want to run. But there was a deal, a way out, a marriage proposal that would erase the entire debt. Sabrina was engaged? Claire blinked in surprise. Her stepsister had never mentioned anything. She was supposed to be married tonight. Margaret checked her watch, and Claire saw her hand trembling. "In 3 hours. To Damian Cross." The name meant nothing to Claire at first. She'd been kept so isolated, so removed from the outside world that she barely knew what happened beyond the mansion's walls anymore. But then she remembered whispered conversations she'd overheard while serving dinner, news reports playing on the television in rooms she cleaned. Damian Cross, the youngest mafia boss in American history, a man who'd seized control of his family's empire at 25 when his father was murdered, and who'd proceeded to eliminate every rival with ruthless efficiency. The newspapers called him untouchable. The police called him a ghost, impossible to prove anything against, always 3 steps ahead. The criminal underworld called him something else entirely, the devil in a wheelchair. 2 years ago, an assassination attempt had left him paralyzed from the waist down. Rather than weakening him, the attack had somehow made him more feared, more dangerous. A man who could command an empire from a wheelchair was a man who clearly didn't need his legs to destroy his enemies. "You can't be serious." Claire's voice came out as barely a whisper. Sabrina was going to marry him? The arrangement was made 6 months ago. Damien Cross approached me himself, or rather, his representatives did. He wanted a Holloway daughter, a society marriage to legitimize his business interests. In exchange, every cent of debt would be forgiven, and he'd funnel clean money into what's left of your father's company. Margaret's mouth twisted into something ugly. Sabrina agreed because she's an idiot who thought she could play games with a man like that. She planned to go through with the wedding, enjoy his money for a few months, then divorce him and take half of everything. That's insane. He'd never let her exactly. Margaret moved to the window, staring out at the rain. Which is why she ran. She finally understood what she'd gotten herself into, and she bolted like the coward she is. Claire's mind raced. What happens now, when he finds out she's gone? Margaret turned, and Claire saw her stepmother's expression shift into something cold and determined. He won't find out, because a Holloway daughter will be at that altar in 3 hours, just as promised. The implication hit Claire like a physical blow. No, you can't. I can, and I will. Margaret crossed the room with surprising speed, gripping Claire's shoulders. You're going to put on that wedding dress, walk down that aisle, and marry Damien Cross. You're going to save this family. This family? Claire jerked away, anger flooding through her for the first time in years. You've spent 3 years telling me I'm not family. I'm the help. I'm nothing. And now you want me to pull? I want you to do what you should have been grateful to do from the beginning. Margaret's voice rose to a shriek. We gave you a roof over your head when we could have thrown you out on the street. We fed you. We let you stay in your father's house. You stole my father's house. You erased every trace of my mother. You took my inheritance. You made me a servant in my own home. The words burst from Claire like a dam breaking. And now you want me to marry a monster because your daughter is too smart to do it herself? Margaret's slap came harder this time, hard enough to knock Claire to the floor. She tasted more blood, felt her cheek swelling already. You'll do this, Margaret said, her voice dropping to something quiet and venomous, or I'll make sure you have nothing, not even this basement room you sleep in. I'll put you on the street tonight with the clothes on your back and make sure no one in this city ever hires you. You think these 3 years have been hard? You have no idea what real suffering looks like. Claire touched her throbbing cheek, tears burning in her eyes. Not from the pain, she'd endured worse, but from the crushing weight of having no choice. No escape, no way out except through whatever nightmare Margaret was pushing her toward. Why would he accept me? She asked dully. When he sees I'm not Sabrina, he won't see. Not until it's too late. Margaret hauled Claire to her feet with surprising strength. The ceremony is at his estate. Very private, very exclusive. Just his people and ours. You'll wear the dress, you'll wear a veil, and you'll keep your mouth shut until the papers are signed. By the time he realizes the switch, the marriage will be legal and the debt will be paid. What he does with you after that is his business. The casual cruelty of it took Claire's breath away. Margaret was sending her into a situation that could end in her death, and she clearly didn't care. Claire was nothing to her, had always been nothing. A problem to be solved, a tool to be used, a sacrifice to be made. Get her ready, Margaret called toward the doorway. 2 women entered, hired help that Claire recognized from the days when the household still had proper staff. They looked at her with pity, but said nothing as they led her to the bathroom. The next hour passed in a blur of hot water and rough hands. They scrubbed her clean, washed her hair, applied makeup with mechanical efficiency. Claire caught glimpses of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the face staring back. They'd covered the bruise on her cheek with foundation, painted her lips red, lined her eyes with dark shadow that made her look older, more sophisticated, nothing like the girl who'd spent years scrubbing floors. Then came the dress. It was beautiful, obscenely so. Ivory silk that must have cost more than Claire had seen in years, with delicate lace sleeves and a bodice covered in tiny pearls. Sabrina's dream dress, custom made for a wedding that was supposed to elevate her into high society. Instead, it hung on Claire's slimmer frame, the bodice slightly loose, the hem dragging on the floor. "It'll have to do," one of the women muttered, pinning the fabric tighter across Claire's back. With the veil, he won't notice. The veil was the final touch. Heavy, cathedral length, made of the same delicate lace as the sleeves. When they lowered it over Claire's face, the world turned hazy and distant. She could barely see through the intricate pattern of flowers and vines. Perfect, she thought bitterly. A bride who can't see where she's going, walking toward a groom who can't walk at all. "It's time." Margaret's voice cut through the fog. "The cars are here." Claire's heart hammered as she was led down the grand staircase. Ironically, the first time she'd been allowed to use it in years. Through the veil, she saw the front doors open, revealing a line of black SUVs waiting in the circular driveway. Rain pounded against their roofs, and men in dark suits held umbrellas at precise angles. These weren't wedding guests, they were soldiers. Damien Cross's men, here to collect what they'd been promised. One of them stepped forward as Claire emerged, a tall man with iron-gray hair and cold eyes that swept over her veiled form with clinical assessment. "Miss Holloway?" "Yes," Margaret answered before Claire could speak. "My daughter is ready." The man's gaze lingered on Claire for a moment longer than comfortable, and she wondered if he could tell, if he could see through the veil and the lies to the terrified girl underneath. But he simply nodded and gestured toward the lead vehicle. "Mr. Cross is waiting." Claire's legs felt like water as she walked down the steps. The rain soaked through her dress within seconds, despite the umbrella held over her head. She was guided into the back of the SUV, Margaret climbing in beside her with a tight smile that was all performance. The door shut with a heavy, final sound. As the convoy pulled away from the mansion, Claire looked back through the rain-streaked window. The house where she'd been born, where her mother had died, where her father had loved her once upon a time. It all disappeared into the darkness behind them. "Remember," Margaret hissed in her ear, quiet enough that the driver wouldn't hear. "Keep the veil down. Don't speak unless spoken to. And pray that Damien Cross is feeling merciful when he realizes what he's gotten." Claire didn't answer. She was too busy trying to breathe through the panic rising in her chest, trying not to think about what waited at the end of this drive. The city passed by outside the windows, familiar streets made strange by rain and darkness. They drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, leaving the older neighborhoods behind for something newer and more ominous. The buildings grew taller, more modern, until they were in the heart of the financial district where steel and glass towers pierced the night sky. The convoy turned into an underground parking garage, descending several levels before finally stopping. Claire's door opened before she could prepare herself. "This way, Miss Holloway." She stepped out onto smooth concrete, her wet dress clinging to her legs, the veil heavy with moisture. Around her, more men in suits formed a protective corridor, their faces blank and professional. Margaret followed close behind, her hand occasionally touching Claire's back in what might have looked like maternal support, but felt more like a warning. They entered an elevator lined with mirrors, and Claire caught a glimpse of herself. A ghost bride, face hidden, body trembling beneath layers of silk and lace. She looked away quickly. The elevator rose smoothly, the numbers climbing higher and higher, 20 floors, 30, 40. When it finally stopped, the doors opened onto a private penthouse entrance that was more beautiful and terrifying than anything Claire had ever seen. Black marble floors, walls of windows showing the city spread out below like a blanket of lights. Modern art that probably cost more than the mansion she'd just left. And at the far end of the vast space, beneath a dramatic arch of white roses and dark greenery, a man in a wheelchair. Damien Cross. Even from a distance, even through her veil, Claire could feel the weight of his presence. He sat perfectly still, hands resting on the arms of his chair, dressed in a black suit that made him look like a shadow against the white flowers. His face was turned toward the windows, profile sharp and beautiful in a way that made her chest tighten. Young, she thought with distant surprise. The rumors had made him sound ancient, but he couldn't have been more than 30. Dark hair, strong jawline, the kind of features that belonged on magazine covers rather than most wanted posters. "Mr. Cross." The gray-haired man who'd collected them from the mansion stepped forward. "The bride has arrived." Damien's head turned, and even though Claire couldn't see his eyes clearly through the veil, she felt the moment his attention locked onto her. It was like being pinned by a physical force, the weight of his gaze traveling over her veiled form with deliberate slowness. He said nothing, simply stared for a long moment before giving a small nod. A man in clerical robes appeared. A judge, Claire realized, not a priest. This would be a legal ceremony, nothing more. No mention of higher powers or sacred vows, just a transaction dressed up in flowers and silk. "We should begin," the judge said quietly. "Unless there are any objections?" Claire's heart screamed at her to run, to tear off the veil and reveal the lie, to throw herself on Damien Cross's mercy and hope for the best. But Margaret's hand pressed against her back, her stepmother's nails digging in hard enough to hurt through the dress. "No objections," Margaret said smoothly. "My daughter is ready to proceed." The judge opened his book, and Claire found herself being guided forward down a makeshift aisle formed by those men in suits. Each step brought her closer to the man in the wheelchair, closer to the point of no return. When she finally stood beside Damien Cross, close enough to touch, she realized how tall he must have been before the attack. Even seated, his shoulders were nearly level with hers. She could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive, cedar and smoke. "Dearly beloved," the judge began, his voice carrying in the vast space, "we are gathered here tonight to witness the joining of Damien Cross and Sabrina Holloway in matrimony. Wrong name, wrong bride, wrong everything." Claire's hands shook as someone placed a bouquet in them. White roses, their stems wrapped in black silk. The flowers trembled along with her fingers. The vows passed in a blur of meaningless words. The judge spoke about commitment and partnership, about two families joining together, about the bonds of marriage. All lies. There was no family here, no love, nothing but fear and debt and a desperate woman's scheme. "Do you, Damien Cross, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was smooth, cultured, with an edge of something dark underneath. Not cruel exactly, but dangerous. The voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "And do you, Sabrina Holloway, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Claire's throat closed. This was it. The final moment before everything became real and irreversible. She could stop it now, could tear off the veil, reveal the truth, accept whatever consequences came from Margaret's fury and Damien's wrath. But what then? Where would she go? What would she do? She had nothing. Had no money, no skills beyond housework, no friends who hadn't forgotten her during 3 years of isolation. The street would be kinder than what Margaret would do to her, but not by much. "I do." The words came out as barely a whisper. "Then by the power vested in me by the state, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The judge closed his book with a soft thump. "You may kiss the bride." Claire's heart stopped. She hadn't thought this far ahead. Hadn't considered that there would be a kiss, that he would lift her veil, that the deception would be revealed before she'd even left the altar. Panic surged through her, but before she could move, Damien's hand lifted. His fingers were warm when they touched her wrist, and his grip was gentle but absolutely certain. He drew her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving her veiled face. "Not tonight," he said quietly, the words meant only for her. "You look tired, wife." The kindness in his voice was somehow more terrifying than cruelty would have been. Claire's mind reeled. He was giving her an out, allowing her to keep the veil in place, but why? Did he know? Could he tell she wasn't Sabrina? But then he released her hand and turned his wheelchair with practiced ease, heading toward a door at the far end of the penthouse. The gray-haired man appeared at his side, and together they disappeared, leaving Claire standing at the altar in her wet dress and heavy veil, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. "Well," Margaret said from behind her, and Claire jumped. She'd almost forgotten her stepmother was there. "That went better than expected. The papers are signed, the debt is cleared, and you're legally Mrs. Damien Cross. Congratulations." There was no warmth in the word, only bitter satisfaction. "What happens now?" Claire asked, her voice hollow. "Now?" Margaret's laugh was sharp. "Now you're his problem, not mine. Whatever he does when he realizes the truth is between you and him, I've got what I needed." She turned to leave, but Claire caught her arm, surprising both of them. "You're just going to abandon me here? With him?" Margaret pulled free, her expression cold. You've been abandoned for years, girl. At least now you'll be abandoned somewhere with money. She glanced around the opulent penthouse, and something like envy flickered in her eyes. Though I doubt you'll live long enough to enjoy it once he figures out you're not Sabrina. Damien Cross doesn't forgive liars. With that final cruelty, Margaret walked away, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The elevator doors closed behind her, and Claire was alone with a handful of stone-faced men who wouldn't meet her eyes. Mrs. Cross? The gray-haired man reappeared, startling her. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your room. My room? Claire's voice cracked. Not his? The man's expression didn't change. Mr. Cross has prepared a suite for you. He thought you might prefer your own space tonight, given the circumstances. Given the circumstances? What did that mean? Did he know? Was he waiting to confront her in private, away from witnesses? But there was nothing to do except follow the man down a hallway lined with more art, more windows, more evidence of wealth beyond anything Claire had ever imagined. He stopped at a door and opened it, gesturing her inside. The suite was larger than Claire's entire basement room had been. A massive bed dominated the space, covered in white linens that looked impossibly soft. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city lights below, the rain still streaking down the glass. A door stood ajar, revealing a bathroom with marble surfaces and a tub large enough to swim in. Your belongings will arrive tomorrow, the man said. There are clothes in the closet and toiletries in the bathroom. If you need anything, there's a phone by the bed. Dial 0. Wait. Claire turned to him, desperate for any information. What's your name? Marcus. I'm Mr. Cross's head of security. He paused, and something almost like pity crossed his face. Get some rest, Mrs. Cross. Tomorrow will be, illuminating. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Claire heard the unmistakable sound of a lock engaging. She was trapped. Claire stood frozen for a long moment, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of the veil and the dress, and the terrible knowledge of what she'd done. Then, finally, she reached up and pulled the veil away. Her reflection stared back from the darkened windows, pale, frightened, makeup smeared from tears she hadn't realized she'd cried. She looked like a ghost, like someone already dead. Claire stripped off the wet dress with shaking hands, leaving it in a puddle on the floor. In the closet, she found a robe, silk, impossibly soft against her skin. The bathroom did indeed have everything she needed, all of it untouched, clearly prepared for a bride who was supposed to be someone else entirely. She should shower, should wash away the makeup and the fear, and try to think clearly about what came next. But exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. 3 years of sleepless nights and constant work catching up all at once. Claire collapsed onto the bed, expecting to lie awake in terror, waiting for Damien Cross to come through the door and demand the truth. But her body had other plans. Within minutes, despite everything, she fell into deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee. For a moment, Claire forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back, the wedding, the veil, the deception, and she sat up with a gasp, her heart pounding. A tray sat on the bedside table, coffee in a delicate china cup, fresh fruit, pastries that were still warm, and a note written in strong, slashing handwriting. Good morning, wife. Join me for breakfast when you're ready. We have much to discuss. Claire's hands trembled as she picked up the coffee cup. It was perfect, cream and sugar in exactly the proportions she liked, though she'd never told anyone her preference. Her stomach churned with anxiety, but she forced herself to drink, to eat a few bites of fruit, to gather what little courage she had left. In the closet, she found more clothes in her size, not Sabrina's size, but hers. Simple, elegant pieces that would actually fit her slimmer frame. How long had these been here? How much had Damien Cross known before she even walked down that aisle? Claire dressed in dark slacks and a cream blouse, braided her hair with shaking fingers, and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked different in these clothes. Less like a servant, more like the daughter of a successful businessman. More like the girl she'd been before everything fell apart. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Marcus stood in the hallway, as if he'd been waiting. Good morning, Mrs. Cross. This way, please. He led her deeper into the penthouse, through rooms that grew progressively more personal. A library with thousands of books, a music room with a grand piano, a gym that looked barely used, and finally, a dining room where floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city spread out below in morning light. Damien Cross sat at the head of the table, coffee cup in one hand, newspaper in the other. He looked up as she entered, and Claire got her first clear look at his face. Beautiful was the wrong word. Compelling, maybe. Dangerous. His eyes were dark, nearly black, and they watched her with an intensity that made her want to run. High cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled, a scar along his jaw that spoke of violence survived. "Sit," he said quietly. Not unkind, but clearly accustomed to being obeyed. Claire sat in the chair Marcus pulled out for her, her hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. "You must have questions," Damien said, setting down his newspaper. "As do I, but first let's establish something. What should I call you, Sabrina or Claire?" The world tilted. He knew, had known all along. "Claire," she whispered. "My name is Claire Holloway." "Claire." He tested the name, nodding slowly. "Better. I prefer the truth, even when it's inconvenient." He took a sip of his coffee, watching her over the rim. "Would you like to know when I figured it out?" "When?" The word came out as barely a breath. "Before you ever walked down the aisle." Damien's smile was sharp and cold. "Did you really think I would agree to marry a woman I'd never properly investigated? I know everything about the Holloway family, including the daughter they tried to erase." Claire's chest tightened. "Then why? Why go through with it? Why not stop the wedding?" "Because, Claire Holloway." Damien leaned forward, his dark eyes pinning her in place. "You were exactly who I wanted all along." The words hung in the air between them like a blade suspended by a thread, sharp and terrifying and incomprehensible. Claire stared at Damien Cross, her mind struggling to process what he'd just said. "I don't understand," she whispered. Damien set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision, the small sound unnaturally loud in the vast dining room. "Then let me be clear. Your stepmother thought she was clever, substituting you for Sabrina. She believed I wanted a Holloway daughter, any Holloway daughter, for the social legitimacy the name would bring. She was wrong." He paused, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "I wanted you specifically, Claire. Sabrina running away simply made things easier." Claire's throat tightened. "That's impossible. You never met me. You couldn't have known I even existed." "I make it my business to know everything about the people I deal with." Damien gestured toward the empty chair beside him, and Marcus appeared from nowhere to pull it out. "Come, sit closer. I don't like shouting across the table." Every instinct screamed at Claire to run, but her legs moved of their own accord, carrying her to the chair Marcus held. She sat stiffly, close enough now to see the fine details of Damien's face, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the precise edge of his jaw, the way his mouth curved slightly at one corner as he watched her trembling hands. "6 months ago," Damien began, his voice low and controlled, "when I first approached your stepmother about a marriage arrangement, I had my people compile detailed reports on everyone in the Holloway household. Your father's business dealings, Margaret's spending habits, Sabrina's social activities, and you." He leaned back in his wheelchair, his posture relaxed but his gaze intense. "The invisible daughter, the one who used to attend charity galas in designer dresses but now scrubbed floors in the basement, the one whose inheritance was stolen, whose name was erased from every family document, who became a ghost in her own home." Claire's chest constricted. "Why would you care about that?" "Because it told me everything I needed to know about your character." Damien picked up a folder that had been resting beside his plate and slid it across the table to her. "Open it." With shaking hands, Claire opened the folder. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, pictures of her scrubbing the mansion's steps, hanging laundry in the garden, carrying groceries through the servants' entrance. Images of Margaret slapping her in the hallway, of Sabrina pouring wine on her dress at a dinner party while guests laughed, of Claire sleeping on a cot in the basement room that should have housed supplies, not people. "How did you get these?" Claire's voice cracked. "I have eyes everywhere." Damien's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his dark eyes. "For 3 months, I watched you endure daily humiliation without breaking. I watched you work yourself to exhaustion and still find the strength to tend your mother's grave every Sunday morning before anyone else woke. I watched you protect what remained of your father's legacy, even though it had been stolen from you. Claire's hands trembled as she looked at the photographs. One showed her kneeling beside her mother's headstone, pulling weeds from the overgrown plot. Another captured her in the mansion's library late at night, reading by flashlight after everyone else had gone to bed. There were dozens more, documenting 3 years of suffering she'd thought was invisible to the world. Why? The word came out broken. Why would you watch me? What could you possibly want from someone like me? Damien was silent for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Claire look up from the photographs. Do you know what most people see when they look at me, Claire? She shook her head mutely. They see the wheelchair. They see a cripple who built an empire from a position of weakness, who commands fear despite being unable to stand. His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. They see someone broken, someone to pity or underestimate or assume they can manipulate. I don't see that, Claire said quietly, surprising herself. No? Damien's eyebrow lifted slightly. What do you see? Claire met his gaze, and for the first time since entering the dining room, she felt a flicker of something other than fear. I see someone who's more dangerous because he doesn't need his legs to destroy his enemies. I see someone who turned a vulnerability into a weapon. The silence that followed was different, charged with something Claire couldn't name. Damien studied her with those dark, unreadable eyes, and she had the distinct impression of being assessed, weighed, measured against some standard she couldn't comprehend. Exactly, he said finally. Which is why I chose you, Claire, because you understand what it means to survive from a position of powerlessness. You know how to endure, how to observe, how to find strength where others see only weakness. He leaned forward, close enough that she could smell the cedar and smoke of his cologne. Sabrina would have been useless to me, a spoiled socialite who thinks beauty and charm are enough to navigate this world. But you? His eyes traveled over her face, lingering on the faint yellow bruise her makeup couldn't quite hide. You've been forged in fire. You're unbreakable in ways she'll never understand. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. What exactly do you want from me? Everything. The word fell between them like a stone into deep water. I want a wife who can stand beside me in a world that respects only strength. I want someone who understands sacrifice and loyalty, who won't crumble under pressure. I want a partner, not a decorative accessory. He paused, and something almost like regret crossed his features. What I'm offering you is a choice, Claire. You can walk away right now. I'll arrange transportation, give you enough money to start over somewhere new, and we'll quietly annul this marriage. Or you can stay. And if I stay? Her voice was barely a whisper. If you stay, you become Mrs. Damien Cross in every sense of the word. You'll have wealth, protection, and power beyond anything you've imagined. But you'll also step into a dangerous world where enemies will see you as a target, where one mistake could cost you everything. His expression hardened. I won't lie to you. Staying means accepting risks most people can't fathom, but it also means never being powerless again. Never being invisible. Never scrubbing floors while the people who destroyed you sleep in silk sheets. The offer was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Claire thought of Margaret's cruel smile, of Sabrina's casual cruelty, of 3 years spent as a ghost in her own life. The temptation to accept, to seize this chance for something better, was overwhelming. But she forced herself to ask the question that mattered most. Why me, really? You could have anyone. Why choose someone broken? Damien's hand moved so quickly she didn't see it coming. His fingers caught her chin, tilting her face up until she had no choice but to meet his gaze. You're not broken, Claire. You're a survivor. There's a difference. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, just below the bruise. Broken things stay shattered. Survivors learn to use their scars as armor. The touch was gentle but absolutely certain, and Claire felt something shift inside her chest, a crack in the careful walls she'd built around her heart during 3 years of isolation. I need time, she said, pulling back from his hand. To think. You have until tonight. Damien released her, leaning back in his wheelchair with that same assessing look. At 8 o'clock, there's a charity gala downtown, the annual Children's Hospital fundraiser. I'm expected to attend, and as my wife, you'll be expected to accompany me." He paused, letting the implication sink in. "If you come to that gala, you're choosing to stay. If you don't, Marcus will have your things packed and a car waiting to take you wherever you want to go." Claire stood on shaking legs. "And you'll just let me leave? No consequences?" "None." Damien's expression was unreadable. "I want a willing partner, not a prisoner. The choice is yours." Marcus appeared at her elbow, and Claire realized she was being dismissed. Her mind reeling, she let herself be guided back through the labyrinth of rooms to her suite. The door closed behind her, and she was alone with the most impossible decision of her life. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Claire paced the length of her suite, her thoughts churning. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was insane, that she should run while she had the chance, that Damien Cross was exactly the monster the newspapers claimed. But another part, the part that had survived 3 years of Margaret's cruelty, that had endured humiliation and abuse without breaking, whispered something different. This was an opportunity, a chance to reclaim not just her father's legacy but her own identity, a chance to become someone who couldn't be erased or forgotten or pushed aside. At 2 o'clock, there was a knock on her door. Claire opened it to find a team of women carrying garment bags and makeup cases. "Mr. Cross asked us to prepare you for tonight," one of them said with a professional smile. "If you're planning to attend, of course." Claire stared at the garment bags, her heart pounding. This was it. The moment she had to decide, stay or go, safety or power. The known misery of starting over with nothing, or the unknown danger of Damien Cross's world. She thought of her mother's grave, overgrown and forgotten. She thought of her father's company, stripped and sold off piece by piece. She thought of Margaret's slap and Sabrina's laughter, and 3 years of being invisible. "Come in," Claire said, stepping aside. The transformation began immediately. They led her to the bathroom where the enormous tub had been filled with scented water. Claire sank into the heat, letting them wash away the last traces of the frightened girl who'd arrived in a wet wedding dress. When they finally pulled her from the water and wrapped her in towels, she felt like a snake shedding old skin. The dress they'd brought was midnight blue silk that hugged her curves and fell in elegant folds to the floor. Not white like a bride, not innocent or pure. Something darker, more sophisticated, more dangerous. They styled her hair in an intricate updo that exposed her neck and shoulders, applied makeup that turned her bruise invisible and made her eyes look enormous, slipped diamond earrings into her lobes. When Claire finally looked at herself in the full-length mirror, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. This person looked powerful, confident, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with decoration and everything to do with presence. "Mr. Cross is waiting in the foyer," one of the women said, checking her watch. "It's nearly 8. Claire's stomach clenched. This was really happening. She was going to walk out of this room and into a life she couldn't imagine, beside a man she barely knew, into a world that could destroy her. But she'd already been destroyed once. What was one more risk when the alternative was returning to invisibility? The elevator ride down felt surreal, like descending into a dream. When the doors opened, Claire stepped into the foyer and found Damien waiting exactly where she'd first seen him, beneath that arch of white roses, perfectly still in his wheelchair, dressed in a black tuxedo that made him look like darkness personified. His eyes traveled over her slowly, taking in every detail of the transformation, and something flickered across his face that might have been approval, or hunger, or something more complex that Claire couldn't name. "You look exceptional," he said quietly. "Thank you." Claire's voice was steadier than she expected. "I wasn't sure you'd think I'd come." "I knew you would," Damien gestured toward the elevator. "You're not someone who runs from challenges, Claire. That's why I chose you." They descended to the underground garage where a sleek black car waited, flanked by 2 SUVs full of security. Marcus held the door while Claire climbed into the back seat, her dress pooling around her legs like liquid night. Damien's wheelchair folded with practiced ease, and he transferred himself into the seat beside her with fluid grace that suggested years of adaptation. As the convoy pulled out into the city streets, Claire watched the buildings slide past and tried to calm her racing heart. "Tell me about this gala. What should I expect?" A room full of wealthy people pretending to care about charity while they measure each other's worth in diamonds and political connections. Damien's tone was dry. You'll be introduced as my wife. People will be surprised. I don't usually bring anyone to these events. There will be questions, speculation, and more than a few people trying to determine if you're a weakness they can exploit. Claire's stomach dropped. How should I respond? However you want. Damien glanced at her, and in the passing streetlights, his eyes gleamed. You're my wife now, Claire. That means you speak with my authority. Anyone who disrespects you disrespects me. He paused, letting that sink in. And people are very careful about disrespecting me. The words should have been comforting, but they only reminded Claire of how little she understood about the world she was entering. Will Margaret be there, or Sabrina? No. Your stepmother wasn't invited, and Sabrina is likely too busy hiding from the consequences of her actions. Damien's expression hardened slightly. Though they'll hear about your appearance soon enough, the society pages will be full of speculation tomorrow. The car pulled up to a glittering hotel, and Claire's breath caught. A red carpet stretched from the curb to the entrance, lined with photographers and reporters. This wasn't just a charity gala. It was a spectacle, a performance, a stage where the city's elite displayed their wealth and power. Ready? Damien asked, and Claire heard the challenge in his voice. She thought about turning back, about asking Marcus to take her anywhere but here. But then she remembered Sabrina's laughter as wine soaked into her dress, Margaret's hand connecting with her face, 3 years of being nothing and no one. Yes, Claire said, lifting her chin. I'm ready. Marcus opened the door, and camera flashes exploded like stars. Claire stepped out onto the red carpet, the silk dress flowing around her, diamonds glittering at her ears. Behind her, she heard the smooth sound of Damien's wheelchair, felt his presence at her side like a shield. Mr. Cross, the reporter surged forward. Who's your companion? Is it true you got married? Mr. Cross, can we get a statement? Damien raised one hand and the crowd fell silent with shocking speed. Gentlemen, ladies, allow me to introduce my wife, Claire Cross. The announcement hit like a thunderclap. Claire heard gasps, saw camera flashes intensify, felt the weight of 100 eyes suddenly focused on her with laser precision. When did you get married? Someone shouted. How did you meet? Another called. Mrs. Cross, what do you have to say about... My wife and I value our privacy, Damien cut in smoothly, his voice carrying absolute authority. We're here tonight to support the Children's Hospital, not to provide entertainment for gossip columns. If you'll excuse us. His hand found Claire's, his grip warm and certain, and together they moved up the red carpet. Claire focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on keeping her expression calm and poised, on not letting the overwhelming attention crack her carefully constructed composure. Inside the hotel ballroom, the spectacle intensified. Crystal chandeliers hung from gilded ceilings, casting rainbow light across marble floors. Women in designer gowns clustered in groups, men in tuxedos held whiskey glasses, and everyone turned to stare as Damien Cross entered with a woman no one recognized on his arm. Stay close, Damien murmured, low enough that only she could hear. And remember, you belong here just as much as anyone else in this room. More, actually, because most of these people inherited their money. You earned your place. The words gave Claire a strange kind of courage. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and met the curious stares with calm confidence she didn't entirely feel. A woman detached herself from a nearby group and approached with the predatory grace of a shark scenting blood. She was beautiful in the way of old money, perfect blonde hair, flawless skin, a dress that probably cost more than Claire's father's car, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Damien, how unexpected to see you here with a guest. Her gaze raked over Claire with undisguised assessment. And who might this be? Victoria. Damien's tone was polite but cold. Allow me to introduce my wife, Claire. Claire, this is Victoria Ashford. Her family owns half the real estate in the financial district. Victoria's smile froze. Wife? I had no idea you were even seeing anyone. I value discretion, Damien said smoothly. Clearly. Victoria's eyes narrowed on Claire. Forgive me, but you look so familiar. Have we met? What did you say your maiden name was? Claire's heart stuttered, but before she could answer, Damien's hand tightened on hers. Claire prefers to focus on our future rather than dwelling on the past. I'm sure you understand. It was a dismissal wrapped in velvet, but Victoria recognized it for what it was. Her smile turned brittle. Of course. How lovely. Well, congratulations on your marriage. I'm sure it will be very interesting. She swept away, and Claire released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She knows something. Victoria knows everything about everyone. It's her hobby. Damien guided his wheelchair toward the bar with Claire still at his side. She'll spend the rest of the evening trying to figure out who you are and whether you're a threat to her social standing. Let her wonder. The bartender appeared immediately, deferential to the point of obsequiousness. Mr. Cross, your usual? Please, and for my wife. Damien glanced at Claire. White wine, she said, finding her voice. Thank you. As the bartender prepared their drinks, more people approached, a steady stream of introductions and careful questions, each person trying to place her, to understand who she was and where she'd come from. Claire fielded them as best she could, keeping her answers vague, smiling politely, letting Damien's presence shield her from the worst of the scrutiny. Then someone new appeared at Damien's elbow. A man in his 50s with iron gray hair and sharp eyes that reminded Claire uncomfortably of Margaret's calculating stare. Damien, I need a word. In private. His gaze flicked dismissively over Claire. Without your companion. Anything you need to say to me can be said in front of my wife, Damien replied, his tone dropping several degrees. The man's jaw tightened. It's about the shipment from overseas. The complications we discussed. Then let's discuss them. Damien's expression was utterly neutral, but Claire felt tension radiate from him like heat. Here and now, Robert. Robert's face flushed. This is an appropriate conversation for my wife? Damien's voice went soft and dangerous. My wife who has complete knowledge of my business interests and full authority to speak on my behalf? That wife? Claire's eyes widened slightly. She had no knowledge of any business interest, legitimate or otherwise. But Damien's hand squeezed hers gently, a silent message to stay quiet and let him handle this. Robert's face went from red to purple. You can't be serious. You'd trust a woman you just married with sensitive information. I trust my wife with everything. Damien's eyes were black ice, which is more than I can say for certain business associates who seem to forget that discretion is a requirement, not a suggestion. Now, unless you have something productive to contribute to this conversation, I suggest you rejoin the party. Robert opened his mouth, closed it, then stalked away with barely contained fury. Claire watched him go, her mind racing. What was that about? She asked quietly. A test. Damien accepted his drink from the bartender and took a slow sip. Robert has been trying to undermine my authority for months. He thinks the wheelchair makes me weak. Thinks he can position himself as the real power behind my operation. By publicly backing you, I make it clear that you have my complete trust and support. It destabilizes him. But I don't know anything about your business, Claire protested. You will. Damien's smile was sharp. That's part of what staying means, Claire. I told you. I want a partner, not decoration. Starting tomorrow, you'll learn everything about my empire. The legitimate businesses, the gray areas, the parts that would send most people running. He paused, studying her face. Can you handle that? Claire thought about the question carefully. Could she handle learning that the man she'd married wasn't just powerful but dangerous? That his wealth came from sources polite society pretended didn't exist? That staying beside him meant accepting a world of moral ambiguity? I handled 3 years with Margaret, she said finally. I think I can handle the truth. Damien's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Good. Because the truth is coming whether you're ready or not. Before Claire could ask what he meant, a commotion at the ballroom entrance drew everyone's attention. The crowd parted, and through the gap, Claire saw something that made her blood run cold. Margaret Holloway stood in the doorway, Sabrina at her side, both dressed in their finest and wearing expressions of shocked fury. Their eyes swept the room until they landed on Claire, and the recognition that flashed across their faces was like watching a bomb detonate in slow motion. "Oh no," Claire breathed. "Oh yes," Damien murmured, and there was something almost pleased in his voice. Let the games begin. Margaret crossed the ballroom floor like a woman possessed, Sabrina trailing behind her with wide, disbelieving eyes. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing drama, hungry for the scandal that was about to unfold. Claire's hands trembled as she set down her wine glass, but before she could stand, Damien's fingers closed around her wrist. "Stay seated," he murmured, his voice low and commanding. "Let them come to you. You're not the servant anymore, Claire. Make them remember that." The word steadied her somehow, straightening her spine, lifting her chin. She watched Margaret approach with the same detached calm she'd learned during 3 years of enduring her stepmother's rage. Only now she wasn't standing in a basement wearing rags. She was sitting beside the most powerful man in the city, wearing diamonds and silk, untouchable. Margaret stopped 3 feet away, her face pale beneath expertly applied makeup. Up close, Claire could see the cracks in her stepmother's composure. The slight tremor in her hands, the tightness around her mouth, the barely controlled fury burning in her eyes. "What is the meaning of this?" Margaret's voice shook despite her obvious effort to sound authoritative. "Claire, what are you doing here? And why is everyone calling you—" She cut herself off, her gaze sliding to Damien with something like fear. "Calling her what?" Damien asked pleasantly, though his eyes were cold as winter. "Mrs. Cross, my wife. Both are accurate, Mrs. Holloway. I'm surprised you didn't know, considering you were at the wedding." Sabrina stepped forward, her beautiful face twisted with confusion and anger. "That's impossible. I was supposed to marry you. We had an arrangement." Had being the operative word, Damien's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "You fled before the ceremony. Fortunately, your sister was kind enough to take your place." "Stepsister," Margaret hissed. "Claire is my stepdaughter, not my daughter. There's a significant difference." "Is there?" Damien tilted his head slightly, and Claire recognized the gesture now, a predator assessing prey. "Because from where I'm sitting, she's a Holloway by blood and by law. More legitimate than some, one might argue." The barb hit its mark. Margaret's face flushed, and her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "This is absurd. Claire is nobody. She's—" "Careful." The single word from Damien cut through Margaret's building tirade like a knife. "The woman you're about to insult is my wife. I suggest you choose your next words very carefully, Mrs. Holloway, or you may find yourself regretting them." The threat hung in the air, unmistakable and terrifying. Around them, Claire could feel the crowd leaning in, listening to every word, drinking in the scandal like wine. Victoria Ashford stood nearby with undisguised delight, her phone undoubtedly recording every moment for later dissection. Margaret seemed to realize she was losing control of the situation. She took a breath, smoothed her dress, and forced something resembling a smile. "Of course. I meant no disrespect to your wife, Mr. Cross. I'm simply confused about the circumstances. Claire left our home yesterday evening without explanation. We've been worried sick." The lie was so brazen that Claire almost laughed, but Damien beat her to a response, his voice dripping with false concern. "How terrible for you. Though I'm surprised you noticed her absence, given that Claire tells me she lived in your basement and performed all the household labor while you and your daughter enjoyed the comforts of her father's estate." Margaret's smile froze. "I don't know what she's told you, but she's told me everything." Damien's voice went soft and dangerous. "Every slap, every insult, every year of servitude you forced on her after stealing her inheritance. Shall I continue? Or would you prefer to salvage what remains of your reputation and leave quietly?" The color drained from Margaret's face. Beside her, Sabrina's eyes had gone wide with dawning horror as she finally understood the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just embarrassment, this was exposure. Public humiliation in front of the city's elite, delivered by a man whose word could destroy them completely. "You can't prove any of that," Margaret said, but her voice wavered. "Can't I?" Damien pulled his phone from his jacket pocket with casual ease, tapped the screen a few times, then turned it so Margaret could see. "I have 3 months of surveillance footage documenting Claire's treatment in your home. Every moment of abuse, every act of cruelty, all time-stamped and archived. I could release it to every news outlet in the city by morning, or—" He paused, letting the alternative hang between them. "You could leave now, never contact my wife again, and we'll consider the debt paid in full." Margaret stared at the phone screen where Claire could see herself reflected in miniature scrubbing floors on her knees. The evidence was irrefutable, damning, absolute. "The debt is already paid," Margaret said desperately. "That was the arrangement. Marriage in exchange for the debt to my organization, yes. That's settled. Damien's smile was razor sharp. But the debt you owe Claire, that's something else entirely. You stole 3 years of her life, her inheritance, her dignity. I could demand restitution. I could take everything you have left and still not consider it sufficient payment. He leaned forward slightly in his wheelchair. Or you could walk away now and count yourself lucky that I'm being merciful. Sabrina grabbed her mother's arm, her face pale. Mom, let's go, please. But Margaret wasn't ready to surrender, despite the fear Claire could see in her eyes. This is blackmail. You can't— I can do whatever I want, Mrs. Holloway. That's what power means. Damien's voice remained perfectly calm, which somehow made his words more terrifying. Now, you have two choices. Leave quietly and live with the knowledge that you'll never touch Claire again, or make a scene and discover exactly how unpleasant I can make your life. Choose quickly. My patience has limits. For a long moment, Margaret stood frozen, her face cycling through rage, fear, and calculation. Claire watched her stepmother's internal struggle with a strange sense of detachment. This woman had controlled every aspect of her life for 3 years, had wielded absolute power over her existence, had made her feel small and worthless and invisible. And now Margaret was the one trembling, the one powerless, the one discovering what it felt like to be at someone else's mercy. Fine, Margaret finally spat, her voice venomous. Keep her. She was always more trouble than she was worth anyway. A pathetic, weak little girl who couldn't even stand up for herself. Damien's hand tightened on Claire's wrist, holding her in place when she would have responded. She didn't need to stand up for herself, Mrs. Holloway. She had the intelligence to survive until she found someone who could stand with her. That's not weakness. That's strategy. He released Claire's wrist and gestured toward the exit. Goodbye, Mrs. Holloway. I trust we won't be seeing each other again. Margaret's face went white with fury, but Sabrina was already pulling her toward the door, clearly desperate to escape before things got worse. Claire watched them go, her heart pounding, her hands shaking with adrenaline and something that might have been triumph. The moment they disappeared through the exit, the crowd erupted into whispers. Claire could feel hundreds of eyes on her, assessing, judging, speculating. She'd become the center of attention in the worst possible way, not because of anything she'd done, but because of secrets that had been dragged into the light. That was— Claire's voice failed her. Necessary, Damien finished. They would have continued to torment you if I hadn't made an example. Now everyone in this room knows that you're under my protection. No one will dare touch you. But everyone also knows about— Claire gestured helplessly at the space where Margaret had stood. The basement. The abuse. Everything. Everyone knows that you survived something terrible and came out stronger. Damien's eyes met hers, intense and unwavering. There's no shame in that, Claire. The shame belongs to the people who hurt you, not to you for enduring it. Before Claire could respond, Victoria Ashford appeared at their side, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes gleaming with curiosity. Well, that was quite the display. You certainly know how to make an entrance, Mrs. Cross. I didn't plan it, Claire said quietly. The best drama never is planned. Victoria sipped her champagne, studying Claire with new interest. I have to admit, I'm impressed. Most women would have crumbled under that kind of public confrontation. You barely flinched. I've had practice, Claire said before she could stop herself. Victoria's smile turned genuine for the first time that evening. I can see that. Welcome to the Shark Tank, Mrs. Cross. Something tells me you'll fit in better than anyone expected. She glanced at Damien. Including him. She drifted away, leaving Claire and Damien alone in the middle of the crowded ballroom. The whispers continued, but Claire found herself caring less about them with each passing moment. Let them talk. Let them speculate. She'd survived worse than gossip. Dance with me, Damien said suddenly. Claire blinked in surprise. What? Dance with me. He gestured toward the dance floor where other couples swayed to the orchestra's music. Unless you'd prefer to stand here and let them stare. But you can't— Claire stopped herself, heat flooding her cheeks. I mean, I didn't think that I could dance from a wheelchair. Damien's mouth curved into something that might have been amusement. I can't. But you can dance around me. It's unconventional, but then so are we. He wheeled himself onto the dance floor and Claire followed, her heart racing. The other couples made space for them, watching with undisguised curiosity as Damien positioned his wheelchair and held out his hand. Claire took it, feeling the warmth of his fingers closing around hers. The music swelled, and she began to move. Not the traditional box step she'd learned at Cotillion years ago, but something more fluid, more adaptive. She circled Damien's wheelchair, her hand never leaving his, her dress flowing around her like water. It was strange and beautiful and utterly unconventional. Claire could feel the crowd watching, but she kept her eyes on Damien, on the way he watched her move, on the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're a natural," he murmured as she completed another rotation. "I'm making it up as I go," Claire admitted. "Even better." His hand tightened on hers. "Adaptability is more valuable than perfection." The song ended and polite applause rippled through the crowd. Claire found herself breathless, her cheeks flushed, feeling more alive than she had in years. Damien guided his wheelchair off the dance floor, and Marcus appeared at their side with impeccable timing. "Sir, we have a situation that requires your attention," Marcus said quietly. "In the East Wing, private." Damien's expression shifted immediately, becoming cold and focused. "Show me." He glanced at Claire. "Wait here. I'll return shortly." "Should I come with you?" Claire asked. "Not this time. Marcus will stay with you." Damien nodded to his head of security, then wheeled himself toward a side exit with two other security guards flanking him. Claire watched him go, a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. Marcus stood nearby, his posture relaxed but his eyes constantly scanning the crowd. She realized that even here, surrounded by wealthy philanthropists in designer gowns, there was danger. Damien moved through a world where threats could appear anywhere, anytime. "What kind of situation?" she asked Marcus quietly. "The kind Mr. Cross handles personally, ma'am." Marcus's expression remained neutral. "Nothing for you to worry about." But Claire was worried. She'd married a man she barely knew, stepped into a life she didn't understand, and now she was standing alone in a ballroom full of strangers while her husband dealt with some mysterious crisis. "Mrs. Cross?" A man's voice made her turn. He was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Allow me to introduce myself, Dr. Richard Morrison, director of the Children's Hospital. I wanted to personally thank you and your husband for the generous donation." Claire's mind went blank. "Donation?" "The $5 million pledge, see." Dr. Morrison smiled warmly. "Mr. Cross made it in both your names earlier this evening. It's the largest single contribution we've received this year. With that funding, we'll be able to complete the new cancer treatment wing." $5 million. Claire's head spun. That was more money than she could comprehend, given away as casually as loose change. That's wonderful. I'm glad we could help." "Your husband is an extraordinary man," Dr. Morrison continued. "Despite his reputation in certain circles, he's been one of our most consistent supporters. The pediatric ICU exists because of his funding. Dozens of children are alive today because of his generosity." Claire looked toward the exit where Damien had disappeared, seeing him with new eyes. The ruthless mafia boss who'd destroyed her stepmother's composure with cold efficiency was the same man who quietly funded children's hospitals. The contradictions made her head spin. "He doesn't like publicity for his charitable work," Dr. Morrison added. "But I thought you should know the kind of man you married. Whatever else he may be, he's saved more lives than most people realize." The doctor drifted away to greet other donors, leaving Claire standing alone with Marcus and her whirling thoughts. Every time she thought she understood Damien Cross, he revealed another layer that contradicted everything before it. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Claire's anxiety grew with each minute. Around her, the gala continued, people dancing, drinking, networking, completely unaware that anything was amiss. But Marcus's posture had subtly shifted, his hand resting near his jacket in a way that suggested a concealed weapon. Finally, Damien reappeared through the side entrance. His expression was carefully neutral, but Claire saw tension in the set of his shoulders, a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "We're leaving," he said quietly when he reached her side. "What happened?" Claire asked. "Nothing that concerns tonight." Damien's tone made it clear he wouldn't discuss it further, not here, Not with so many listening ears nearby. Say your goodbyes. Claire nodded, understanding that whatever had happened, it was serious enough to cut the evening short. Marcus appeared with her wrap, draping it over her shoulders with professional efficiency. Within minutes, they were in the elevator, descending to the underground garage where the convoy waited. The ride back to the penthouse was silent. Damien stared out the window, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair with barely controlled tension. Claire didn't push for answers, sensing that he needed space to think, to process whatever crisis had interrupted their evening. Back in the penthouse, Damien wheeled himself directly to his office without a word. The door closed behind him with a decisive click, and Claire was left standing in the foyer with Marcus. "Should I?" Claire gestured helplessly toward the office door. "Give him an hour," Marcus suggested. "When Mr. Cross is dealing with business matters, he prefers solitude initially. He'll call for you when he's ready to talk." Claire nodded, retreating to her suite. She changed out of the blue silk gown, washing away the makeup, unpinning her hair until she looked like herself again. Or some version of herself. A woman caught between who she'd been and who she was becoming. She was sitting on the bed in a robe when the knock came. "Come in." Damien wheeled himself through the doorway, and Claire noticed he'd removed his tuxedo jacket, loosened his tie, rolled up his shirt sleeves. He looked exhausted and furious in equal measure. "I owe you an explanation," he said without preamble. "You don't owe me anything." Claire pulled her knees up to her chest. "This is your world. I'm just trying to navigate it." "That's where you're wrong." Damien moved closer, stopping beside the bed. "You're my wife. That means you deserve the truth, even when it's ugly." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Someone tried to kill me tonight. A bomb in the East Wing, set to detonate during the gala. We found it before it went off, but it was close. Too close." Claire's blood ran cold. "Who would—" "I have enemies. Comes with the territory." Damien's expression was grim. But this was different. The device was sophisticated, placed by someone with intimate knowledge of the hotel's security systems and my schedule. Someone inside my organization. "A traitor," Claire whispered. "Yes." The word came out hard and bitter. "Which means I can't trust anyone right now. I have to assume everyone around me could be compromised. Everyone except—" He stopped, his eyes meeting hers with sudden intensity. "Everyone except you." Claire's breath caught. "Why me?" "Because you have nothing to gain from my death. Our marriage is too new, the contracts aren't finalized. You'd inherit nothing if I died tonight." Damien's mouth twisted into something bitter. "In a twisted way, that makes you the only person I can completely trust right now." The weight of that statement settled over Claire like a heavy blanket. She'd gone from being nobody, nothing, invisible, to being the one person Damien Cross could rely on in a moment of crisis. The responsibility was terrifying. "What do you need from me?" she asked quietly. Damien studied her for a long moment, and Claire saw something shift in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "I need you to be exactly what you've been all evening. Strong, observant, unshakable." He paused. "And I need you to understand that things are going to get dangerous. Whoever tried to kill me tonight will try again. Being my wife makes you a target." "I understand," Claire said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "I'm not going anywhere." Something that might have been relief flickered across Damien's face. "You should be terrified. You should be demanding I send you away to safety." "Maybe I should be." Claire met his gaze steadily. "But I'm not. I survived 3 years of psychological warfare with Margaret. I think I can handle whatever comes next." Damien was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face as if looking for cracks in her resolve. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish." "Can I be both?" Claire asked with a small smile. That drew a genuine laugh from him, short and surprised. "Perhaps." He reached out, his hand finding hers where it rested on her knee. His fingers were warm, his grip certain. "Thank you, Claire, for staying, for not running when you had every reason to." "You gave me a choice, she said quietly. "That's more than anyone else has done in 3 years." Damien's thumb traced across her knuckles, the gesture almost absent-minded. "I meant what I said earlier. You're not broken. You're a survivor, and survivors recognize each other. His eyes met hers, and Claire saw something raw and honest in their depths. I know what it's like to have the world see you as weak when you're anything but. To have people underestimate you because of circumstances beyond your control. The wheelchair, Claire said softly. Among other things. Damien released her hand and wheeled himself toward the window, staring out at the city lights below. My father was a brutal man. Powerful, feared, but brutal. He taught me that showing weakness was death in our world. So when the attack happened, when I woke up in a hospital bed, unable to feel my legs, he trailed off, his jaw tight. Everyone expected me to fall apart, to lose control of the empire he'd built. Instead, I made the weakness a weapon. I let people underestimate me, let them think the wheelchair made me vulnerable, and then I destroyed anyone who tried to take advantage. Claire stood from the bed, moving to stand beside his wheelchair. How many people know the truth? Damien glanced up at her, one eyebrow raised. The truth about what? About whether you're really paralyzed. Claire kept her voice neutral, watching his face carefully. You move with too much control, too much precision. And earlier tonight, when the bomb threat came, you stood up to leave the table before you caught yourself and used the wheelchair instead. The silence that followed was absolute. Damien stared at her with an expression Claire couldn't read. Shock, maybe, or calculation, or something more dangerous. You noticed that, he said finally. It wasn't a question. I notice everything. Claire held his gaze. 3 years of being invisible teaches you to watch, to observe, to see the things other people miss. So yes, I noticed. The question is, why are you still pretending? Damien was quiet for so long that Claire began to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake, if she'd crossed a line that would turn his protection into fury. But when he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than angry. You're more perceptive than I anticipated. He gestured toward the bed. Sit. If we're going to have this conversation, you might as well be comfortable. Claire sat, her heart pounding, waiting for whatever revelation was about to shatter her understanding of the man she'd married. Damien wheeled himself closer, his eyes never leaving her face. You're right. The paralysis was a lie. I've been able to walk for over a year now, but I maintain the illusion because it serves a purpose. He paused, choosing his words with visible care. When people think you're disabled, they let their guard down. They speak freely around you, assuming you're no threat. They underestimate your capabilities, your speed, your reach. It's the perfect cover for gathering intelligence and identifying traitors. Like tonight, Claire realized, the person who planted the bomb probably assumed you'd be confined to the wheelchair, easier to target. Exactly. Damien's smile was sharp. They planned for a man who couldn't run, couldn't fight, couldn't escape. They didn't plan for what I actually am. Claire's mind raced through the implications. How many people know? 5 now. Marcus, my doctor, 2 others whose loyalty is beyond question, and you. His eyes held hers with unsettling intensity. The question is, can I trust you to keep that number at 5? You can, Claire said without hesitation. I understand the value of secrets. I kept my own survival secret from Margaret for 3 years. Damien studied her face, and Claire had the distinct impression of being tested, weighed, measured against some internal standard. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. Then we understand each other. He reached out, his hand finding hers again. Tomorrow, things change. I'm going to start teaching you about my organization, the legitimate businesses, the less legitimate ones, the gray areas in between. You'll meet my key people, learn the hierarchy, understand how everything operates. It won't be easy, and some of what you learn will probably shock you. I'm ready, Claire said, and meant it. We'll see. Damien's thumb traced circles on her palm, the gesture strangely intimate. But first, you need to rest. It's been a long night, and tomorrow will be longer. He released her hand and turned his wheelchair toward the door, but Claire's voice stopped him before he reached it. Damien? He paused, glancing back over his shoulder. Thank you, she said quietly, for defending me tonight, for protecting me from Margaret and Sabrina, for trusting me with the truth. Something softened in Damien's expression, a crack in the armor he showed the world. You're my wife, Claire. Protecting you isn't a favor, it's my obligation. He paused at the doorway. And perhaps in time, more than that. He left before she could respond, the door closing softly behind him. Claire sat alone in her suite, her mind whirling with everything that had happened, everything she'd learned, everything that had changed in the span of a single evening. She'd started the day as nobody, a ghost in her own life. She'd ended as Mrs. Damien Cross, the wife of the most feared man in the city, keeper of dangerous secrets, standing at the threshold of a world she barely understood. And somewhere in the chaos and danger and revelation, Claire realized she wasn't afraid anymore. She was angry at Margaret for 3 years of cruelty, angry at Sabrina for her casual dismissal, angry at a world that had tried to make her invisible. But anger, she was learning, could be a weapon just as effective as any gun or bomb. And Damien Cross had just handed her the tools to forge that anger into something devastating. Tomorrow, her real education would begin. Tomorrow, she would learn to fight back. Tomorrow, she would discover what it meant to be truly powerful in a world that respected only strength. But tonight, Claire allowed herself one moment of simple triumph. She'd survived her stepmother's final attempt at humiliation. She'd stood beside Damien Cross in front of the city's elite and held her ground. She'd proven, to him, to them, to herself, that she was stronger than anyone had believed. The invisible girl was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone dangerous, someone unbreakable, someone who was just beginning to understand the full scope of what she could become. Claire woke to sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows and the distant sound of voices filtering through her closed door. For a moment, she lay still, letting the events of the previous night wash over her like a wave. The gala, Margaret's public humiliation, the bomb threat, Damien's confession about the wheelchair. Each revelation felt surreal in the morning light, like fragments of a dream she couldn't quite believe had been real. But the diamond wedding band on her finger was real enough, catching the light as she held up her hand. Mrs. Damien Cross. The name still felt foreign, like a coat that didn't quite fit yet. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Mrs. Cross, are you awake?" Claire recognized the voice as one of the staff members from yesterday. "Yes, come in." A woman entered carrying a tray laden with coffee, fresh fruit, and warm croissants. She set it on the bedside table with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Cross asked me to inform you that he'll meet you in his office in 1 hour. He suggests you dress comfortably but professionally." The woman paused, then added with a small smile, "He also said to tell you that your education begins today." The words sent a thrill of anticipation and anxiety through Claire's chest. "Thank you. I'll be ready." After the woman left, Claire forced herself to eat despite her nervous stomach, then showered and stood before the closet trying to decide what comfortably but professionally meant in Damien Cross's world. She finally settled on tailored black slacks and a silk blouse the color of charcoal, pulling her hair back into a sleek ponytail that made her look older, more serious. When she emerged from her suite exactly 1 hour later, Marcus was waiting in the hallway. "Good morning, Mrs. Cross. This way, please." He led her through corridors she hadn't explored yet, past rooms whose purposes she could only guess at, until they reached a heavy wooden door at the end of a hallway. Marcus knocked twice, then opened it without waiting for a response. Damien's office was nothing like Claire had expected. She'd imagined something cold and modern, all glass and steel like the rest of the penthouse. Instead, she found herself in a space that felt more like a library, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lining 3 walls, a massive mahogany desk positioned before windows that showed the city spread out below, and leather furniture that looked broken in and comfortable. Damien sat behind the desk, still in his wheelchair, reviewing documents spread across the polished surface. He looked up as she entered, and Claire saw the same intensity in his eyes that had been there last night when he'd revealed the truth about his paralysis. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs facing the desk. "Coffee?" "Please." Claire sat, accepting the cup Marcus poured before he disappeared silently through a side door. Damien set aside his documents, giving her his full attention. "Before we begin, I need to know if you've reconsidered. Last night was traumatic in several ways. If you want to leave, now is the time to say so. No judgment, no consequences." Claire met his gaze steadily. "I haven't changed my mind. I'm staying. Even knowing that someone tried to kill me last night? That being my wife puts you directly in the line of fire? Especially knowing that." Claire wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup. For 3 years, I survived by being invisible, by making myself small enough that no one noticed me. I'm done being invisible, Damien. Whatever comes next, I'd rather face it standing beside you than hiding from it alone. Something flickered in Damien's expression. Approval, maybe, or respect. Then let's begin. He pressed a button on his desk, and a section of the bookshelf slid aside, revealing a wall of monitors showing security feeds from what looked like dozens of locations. My empire is built on 3 pillars: legitimate business, gray market operations, and what most people would call criminal enterprise. You need to understand all 3. Claire's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm listening. The legitimate businesses are easy enough. I own commercial real estate across the city, several investment firms, a portfolio of restaurants and nightclubs, and a private security company that provides protection for corporate clients. Damien tapped his keyboard, and financial reports appeared on one of the monitors. These operations are completely legal, heavily audited, and generate significant revenue. They're also perfect for laundering money from less legitimate sources. Money laundering, Claire repeated, tasting the words. Among other things. Damien's tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather rather than federal crimes. The gray market operations include gambling networks, high-end escort services for wealthy clients, and facilitating transactions between parties who prefer not to involve banks or lawyers. Nothing violent, nothing that harms innocents, but definitely illegal in the eyes of the law. Claire absorbed this, trying to reconcile the man who donated $5 million to children's hospitals with the one calmly describing criminal enterprises. And the third pillar? Protection, enforcement, and control of territory. Damien's expression hardened. This city has various factions competing for power: organized crime families, street gangs, corrupt officials, foreign interests. I maintain dominance by being smarter, better connected, and more ruthless than anyone else when necessary. That means collecting debts, settling disputes, and occasionally removing threats permanently. The final word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Claire understood what he meant without needing it spelled out. Removing threats permanently meant killing people. Her husband was a murderer, or at least he ordered murders. You're not running, Damien observed quietly. Would it change anything if I did? Claire asked. Probably not, but I'm giving you the chance to preserve your illusions, if you want them. Claire thought about that for a moment, remembering the girl she'd been 3 years ago, the daughter of a successful businessman, raised in comfort and luxury, protected from the harsh realities of the world. That girl would have been horrified by what Damien was telling her. That girl would have run screaming. But that girl had died the day her father's heart gave out, buried alongside him in the family plot, while Margaret and Sabrina picked over the remains of her life like vultures. I don't want illusions, Claire said finally. I want the truth. All of it. Damien studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, then let me tell you about the organization you've married into. For the next 3 hours, Damien walked Claire through the intricate web of his empire. He showed her organizational charts detailing the hierarchy of his operation, explained the various revenue streams and how they interconnected, identified key players and their roles. He taught her the language of his world, the coded phrases used to discuss illegal activities, the hand signals his men used to communicate in public, the subtle ways territory and power were negotiated. Claire absorbed it all with laser focus, asking questions when things weren't clear, taking mental notes of names and faces as Damien showed her surveillance footage of various operations. Her mind cataloged information with the same meticulous attention to detail she'd once applied to managing the Holloway household, only now instead of tracking which rooms needed cleaning, she was learning which district lieutenants were loyal and which ones bore watching. You're a quick study, Damien said as he closed out the final presentation. Most people would be overwhelmed by now. I'm good at learning systems, Claire replied. Every organization has its own logic, its own rules. Yours is just more complex than most, and more dangerous. Damien wheeled himself around the desk, stopping in front of her chair. Which brings us to the practical portion of your education. Starting tomorrow, you'll begin weapons training with Marcus. Basic marksmanship, self-defense, situational awareness. I want you able to protect yourself. Claire's eyes widened. You want me to learn to shoot? I want you to survive if someone comes for you. Damien's expression was grim. The bomb last night was a warning that things are escalating. Whoever is after me won't hesitate to use you as leverage or eliminate you as a message. You need to be able to defend yourself. The reality of what she'd stepped into hit Claire with renewed force. This wasn't just about reclaiming her dignity or escaping Margaret's cruelty. This was about surviving in a world where violence was currency and loyalty was the only thing keeping you alive. Okay, she said quietly. I'll learn. Damien reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the chair arm. I know this is a lot. We can take breaks, pace things slower if you need. No. Claire shook her head firmly. The faster I learn, the faster I become an asset instead of a liability. Keep going. Something that might have been pride flickered across Damien's face. Then let's move on to the current crisis. The bomb last night was sophisticated, which means it was either placed by a professional or by someone with access to professional resources. I've narrowed the list of suspects to 3 people within my organization who have the knowledge, opportunity, and potential motive to betray me. He pulled up 3 files on his computer, turning the monitor so Claire could see. 3 faces stared back at her, 2 men and a woman, all professionally photographed, all looking dangerous in different ways. This is Vincent Caruso, my lieutenant overseeing the docks and shipping operations. Damien pointed to the first image, a man in his 40s with cold eyes and a scar across his cheek. He's been with me for 8 years, loyal and effective, but he's also ambitious. If he thought he could take my place, he might try. Next is Elena Volkov, head of my financial operations and money laundering networks. The woman in the photo was beautiful in a severe way, with platinum blonde hair and ice blue eyes. She's brilliant with numbers and connections to Eastern European organizations that might want me gone. But she's also made millions working for me, so the motive is unclear. Finally, Robert Chen, who you saw briefly at the gala last night. The third image showed the man who'd tried to pull Damien aside for a private conversation. He manages my legitimate businesses and serves as the public face of my corporate interests. He's been increasingly resentful of my methods and has hinted that he thinks I'm too volatile, too dangerous. If he wanted to take the organization in a different direction, removing me would be step 1. Claire studied the 3 faces, her mind working through the implications. Can you investigate all 3 simultaneously without tipping them off? I'm already investigating, Damien said, but I need to be careful. If the traitor realizes I'm onto them, they might accelerate their plans or go underground. What I need is someone they won't suspect. Someone who can observe, gather information, ask innocent questions without raising alarms. Understanding dawned. You want me to spy on them? I want you to meet them, engage with them as my wife, and tell me what you observe. Damien's eyes were intense. You have a gift for seeing things others miss. You noticed my wheelchair was a lie when no one else has in over a year. Use that skill to help me identify who wants me dead. Claire's heart raced with a mixture of fear and excitement. This was it. The moment she stopped being a passive observer and became an active participant in Damien's world. When do I start? Tonight. I'm hosting a dinner here in the penthouse for my senior leadership. All 3 suspects will attend, along with several others to provide cover. You'll be introduced as my wife, and you'll spend the evening observing, conversing, learning who they are and how they interact. He paused. Can you handle that? Claire thought about the question carefully. Could she sit at a table with people who might want her husband dead, smile and make conversation while looking for signs of betrayal, all while maintaining the facade of an innocent new bride? 3 years ago, the answer would have been no, but 3 years of surviving Margaret had taught her something valuable about wearing masks and hiding her true thoughts. Yes, she said, I can handle that. Good. Damien released her hand and wheeled himself back behind his desk. Marcus will brief you this afternoon on the key players who will be attending. Study their backgrounds, their relationships, anything that might give you insight into their loyalties. And Claire? He waited until she met his eyes. Be careful. These people are dangerous. They've survived in this world because they're smart, ruthless, and paranoid. One wrong question, one suspicious glance, and you could become a target yourself. The warning sent a chill down Claire's spine, but she forced herself to nod calmly. I understand. I hope you do. Damien's expression was unreadable. Because once you step into that dining room tonight, there's no going back. You'll be all the way in, Claire, part of this world, complicit in everything I do, legally and morally tied to choices that most people would consider monstrous. He leaned forward, his dark eyes pinning her in place. Last chance to walk away clean. After tonight, your hands will be as dirty as mine. Claire stood slowly, smoothing down her blouse with hands that only trembled slightly. My hands have been dirty since the moment I agreed to marry you under false pretenses. Since I stood at that altar wearing a veil and let everyone believe I was Sabrina. I crossed the line days ago, Damien. Tonight just makes it official. She turned toward the door, but Damien's voice stopped her before she reached it. Claire? She glanced back over her shoulder. Don't trust anyone tonight. Not Vincent, not Elena, not Robert. Not even the people who seem friendly or sympathetic. In my world, the smiling face is usually the one holding the knife. He paused, and something almost like concern crossed his features. And if anything feels wrong, if you sense danger, you get Marcus immediately. Don't try to be brave, just survive. I will, Claire promised. She spent the rest of the afternoon with Marcus in a secure room lined with monitors and filing cabinets, learning everything she could about the people who would be at tonight's dinner. Marcus was a patient teacher, walking her through each person's background, their position in Damien's organization, their known loyalties and suspected weaknesses. Vincent Caruso grew up on the docks, Marcus explained, pulling up a detailed file. His father worked for Mr. Cross's father before the assassination. Vincent has always been loyal, but he's also proud. If he thought Mr. Cross was showing weakness or making strategic errors, he might decide the organization needs new leadership. What about his personal life? Claire asked. Divorced twice, no children. He has a gambling problem that Mr. Cross knows about and tolerates because Vincent always pays his debts. He's motivated by respect and power more than money. Marcus pulled up another file. Elena Volkov is different. She came to us 5 years ago from a Russian syndicate, bringing connections and financial expertise. She's brilliant, disciplined, and completely emotionless when it comes to business. If she betrays Mr. Cross, it will be because someone offered her something better, more power, more autonomy, or a bigger piece of a different empire. And Robert Chen? Marcus's expression soured slightly. Robert is complicated. He's brilliant at running the legitimate businesses and making Mr. Cross look respectable to the outside world. But he's also squeamish about the rougher aspects of the operation. He's argued several times that we should phase out the criminal enterprises and focus solely on legitimate ventures. Mr. Cross has refused, which hasn't sat well with Robert. Claire processed this information, building mental profiles of each suspect. Vincent was motivated by pride and respect, Elena by calculated self-interest, Robert by ideology and perhaps moral superiority. 3 very different people with 3 very different potential motives for betrayal. Who do you think it is? She asked Marcus. The security chief was silent for a long moment, weighing his words. Honestly, Mrs. Cross, I don't know. Any of them could have done it, or none of them. It's possible the real traitor is someone we haven't even considered, using the bomb as a distraction while they make their real move. He met her eyes seriously. That's why tonight is so important. Fresh eyes, fresh perspective. You might notice something the rest of us have missed because we're too close to see it clearly. As evening approached, Claire returned to her suite to prepare. The staff had laid out a dress on her bed, deep burgundy silk that was elegant without being overly formal, sophisticated without trying too hard. She showered, dried her hair, and applied makeup with careful precision, transforming herself into the poised, confident woman she needed to appear to be. When she finally looked in the mirror, a stranger stared back. This woman looked powerful, assured, like someone who belonged in Damien Cross's world. Claire just had to hope the illusion was convincing enough to fool trained killers and career criminals. Marcus appeared at precisely 7 to escort her to the dining room. Remember, he said quietly as they walked, you're just the new wife tonight. Curious, interested in your husband's associates, but not asking pointed questions. Keep it natural. I understand, Claire said, her heart pounding against her ribs. The dining room had been transformed since the last time she'd seen it. The long mahogany table was set for 12 with crystal stemware and fine china, candles flickering in silver holders. Through the windows, the city lights glittered like fallen stars, beautiful and cold. Damien sat at the head of the table in his wheelchair, dressed in a charcoal suit that made him look every inch the powerful crime lord he was. He looked up as Claire entered, and she saw approval in his eyes as they traveled over her appearance. "You look beautiful," he said quietly, gesturing to the seat at his right hand. "Thank you." Claire took her place, acutely aware of the eyes watching her from around the room. The other guests began arriving in a steady stream. Vincent Caruso entered first, his scarred face breaking into a smile that didn't reach his eyes as he greeted Damien. "Boss, I was surprised to get the dinner invitation." "I wanted you to meet my wife properly," Damien replied smoothly. "Claire, this is Vincent Caruso, one of my most trusted lieutenants." Vincent's eyes raked over Claire with undisguised assessment. "Mrs. Cross, I heard about the wedding, very sudden." "Love doesn't follow schedules," Claire said with a smile she didn't feel. "Apparently not." Vincent took a seat across from her, still watching her with those cold, calculating eyes. Elena Volkov arrived next, her platinum hair swept back in an elegant chignon, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. She moved like a dancer, fluid and controlled, offering Damien a cool smile before turning her ice blue gaze on Claire. "The mysterious bride," Elena said, her accent barely noticeable. "I've been very curious to meet the woman who captured our Damien's attention. He's not usually the marrying type." "People change," Claire replied evenly. "Do they?" Elena's smile was sharp as broken glass. "In my experience, people are remarkably consistent. They just get better at hiding who they really are." The words felt like a warning, though Claire couldn't tell if it was directed at her or at Damien. She filed the observation away for later analysis. Robert Chen was the last of the three suspects to arrive, and Claire recognized him immediately from the gala. He looked uncomfortable in his expensive suit, like a man who'd rather be anywhere but here. He greeted Damien with professional courtesy, but genuine coolness. "Robert," Damien said, "I believe you met my wife briefly last night." "Yes, though we didn't have a chance to speak properly." Robert's smile was tight as he looked at Claire. "I have to say, Mrs. Cross, I was surprised by your marriage. Damien never mentioned he was seeing anyone seriously." "It was a whirlwind romance," Claire said, using the prepared answer Marcus had coached her on. "Whirlwind indeed." Robert's tone suggested he didn't believe that for a second. The other guests filled in the remaining seats. Senior lieutenants, financial advisors, a lawyer whose presence suggested he handled more than standard corporate contracts. Claire greeted each one with practiced charm, filing away observations about body language, word choice, the subtle dynamics of power and deference that played out in every interaction. Dinner began with impeccable service, course after course of exquisitely prepared food that Claire barely tasted. She was too focused on watching, listening, analyzing. Vincent spoke loudly and often, dominating conversations with stories of past operations and barely veiled criticisms of Damien's recent strategic choices. Elena said little but missed nothing, her ice blue eyes tracking every gesture and word with predatory focus. Robert engaged in polite conversation but radiated discomfort, as if sitting at this table violated some internal moral code. "So, Mrs. Cross," Vincent said during the third course, his wine glass already empty and being refilled, "what do you think of your husband's business ventures?" The question was a trap, Claire realized. Too enthusiastic an endorsement would seem naive. Too much hesitation would suggest disloyalty or weakness. "I think Damien is brilliant at identifying opportunities others miss," she said carefully, "and I admire his ability to maintain control of such complex operations." "Complex?" Vincent repeated, laughing. "That's diplomatic. Some might say dangerous, others might say unsustainable." "Vincent," Damien's voice carried a warning edge. "I'm just saying," Vincent pressed on, emboldened by wine. "The old ways worked because they were simple. Territory, loyalty, respect. But you've complicated everything with all these legitimate businesses and international connections. Makes us vulnerable." "Makes us wealthy," Elena interjected smoothly. "The diversification has tripled our revenue in 5 years. Perhaps, Vincent, you're simply uncomfortable with change." Vincent's face darkened. "I'm uncomfortable with weakness masquerading as strategy." The tension at the table ratcheted up instantly. Claire felt Damien go still beside her, the dangerous kind of stillness that preceded violence. But before he could respond, Robert spoke up. "I actually agree with some of Vincent's concerns," he said quietly, and every head turned toward him. "Not about the legitimate businesses, those are sound. But the criminal enterprises put everything at risk. One federal investigation, one determined prosecutor, and we could all go down. We should be moving away from that exposure, not doubling down on it." "Interesting," Damien said, his voice deceptively calm. "Two of my most senior people questioning my leadership in my own home at my own table. Should I be concerned about a mutiny?" The word landed like a grenade. Vincent straightened in his chair, his hand moving unconsciously toward his jacket, where Claire suspected he carried a weapon. Robert paled, understanding too late that he'd overstepped. Only Elena remained perfectly composed, sipping her wine with apparent disinterest. "Not a mutiny," Robert said quickly. "Just concerns. About our direction. About sustainability." "Sustainability," Damien repeated. "Tell me, Robert, in your vision of a purely legitimate operation, what happens to the 200 people currently employed in our less legal ventures? What happens to the neighborhoods we protect from rival gangs? What happens to the power structure that keeps this city from descending into chaos? We could transition them, find other—" "You could do nothing," Damien cut him off, his voice going cold and hard. "Because you don't understand this world, Robert. You understand spreadsheets and corporate law. You don't understand that power isn't built in boardrooms. It's built in the streets, in the shadows, in the places where people like you fear to go." Robert's face flushed with anger and humiliation. Beside Claire, Vincent was smiling with vicious satisfaction, clearly pleased to see someone else receiving Damien's displeasure. And across the table, Elena watched it all with those ice-blue eyes, calculating, assessing, waiting. Claire's mind raced. This dinner wasn't just about introducing her to Damien's people. It was a test of them, of her, of the fragile bonds holding the organization together. Damien was deliberately pushing them, provoking reactions, creating stress to see who broke and how. "If I may," Claire said quietly, surprising herself. Every eye turned to her. "I think there's value in both perspectives. Vincent is right that there's strength in traditional methods and clear hierarchies. Robert is right that unnecessary risk should be minimized. But Damien is right that true power requires controlling multiple territories, literal and figurative. The key is balance, isn't it? Respect for what works while remaining adaptive to changing circumstances." The silence that followed was absolute. Claire's heart hammered as she realized she'd just offered strategic advice to a table full of career criminals who'd been in this business longer than she'd been alive. She'd either just earned respect or signed her death warrant. Then Damien's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. "My wife makes an excellent point. Balance, adaptation, strength without rigidity." His eyes swept the table. "Perhaps you all could learn something from someone who's survived by being smart rather than simply brutal." The rest of the dinner passed in uneasy tension, conversation stilted and careful. Claire continued to observe, noting how Vincent grew progressively drunker and more belligerent, how Robert remained withdrawn and resentful, how Elena stayed perfectly controlled and utterly unreadable. When the meal finally ended and the guests began to depart, Claire felt exhausted from the effort of maintaining her facade. She said goodbye to each person with appropriate warmth, watching them file out until only she and Damien remained in the dining room. "Well," Damien said, wheeling himself away from the table. "That was illuminating. What did you observe?" Claire organized her thoughts carefully. "Vincent is angry and feels disrespected. He thinks you've gone soft, lost touch with what made your father's organization strong. He's volatile enough that he might act rashly if he thought he had support." She paused. "But I don't think he's the traitor. He's too loud, too obvious. If he wanted you dead, he'd challenge you directly, not plant bombs." "Agreed. And Elena?" "Elena is the most dangerous person at that table." Claire met Damien's eyes. "She's patient, calculating, and completely without sentiment. If she's betraying you, it's because someone made her a better offer. But she's also smart enough to know that you're the best thing for her right now. I don't think she's the traitor either, unless something significant has changed that we don't know about. Which leaves Robert." "Which leaves Robert," Claire confirmed. "He's ideologically opposed to half of what you do. He's morally uncomfortable with violence. And he's arrogant enough to think he could run things better, cleaner, more ethically. She thought about the flush of anger on Robert's face during dinner. He's also the type who would rationalize murder as necessary for the greater good. Killing you to save the organization from itself? That's the kind of twisted logic someone like Robert could embrace. Damien was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the arm of his wheelchair. Your reasoning is sound, but reasoning isn't proof. I need evidence before I can act. Then we get evidence. Claire's voice was firm. Give me access to Robert. Let me befriend him, earn his trust, get him talking. If he's the traitor, he'll eventually slip. That's dangerous, Claire. If Robert is willing to plant bombs, he won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens to expose him. I know, Claire squared her shoulders, but you said you needed someone they wouldn't suspect. Robert sees me as Damien Cross's naive new wife, possibly a civilizing influence. I can use that. I can get close to him in a way you can't. Damien studied her face for a long moment, and Claire saw conflict warring in his dark eyes. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right, but you'll wear a wire during any private conversations, and Marcus will never be more than 30 seconds away. The moment you feel unsafe, you abort. Understood? Understood, Claire agreed. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they were planning settling over them both. Then Damien reached out, pulling her chair closer to his until they were face to face. You were extraordinary tonight, he said quietly. The way you handled Vincent's aggression, Robert's moral superiority, Elena's mind games, the way you diffused the tension with that speech about balance. You're a natural at this, Claire. I just said what seemed reasonable, Claire protested. No. Damien's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. You read the room, assessed the power dynamics, and offered a solution that acknowledged everyone's concerns while reinforcing my authority. That's not luck. That's skill. His eyes held hers with unsettling intensity. You're becoming exactly what I knew you could be. The question is, how do you feel about that? Claire thought about the question honestly. How did she feel about becoming someone who could sit at a table with criminals and feel comfortable? Who could strategize about identifying traitors and gathering evidence? Who could willingly put herself in danger to protect a man she barely knew? I feel alive, she said finally. For 3 years I was a ghost. Now I'm real again. Dangerous, maybe. Morally compromised, definitely, but real. She met Damien's gaze without flinching. And I'm not sorry about that. Something shifted in Damien's expression, something that looked almost like hunger. His hand slid from her cheek to the back of her neck, pulling her closer until their foreheads touched. You're remarkable, he breathed against her lips. And you're mine. Then he kissed her, and Claire's world tilted on its axis. The kiss was nothing like the chaste press of lips to knuckles at their wedding. This was possession, claim, promise, and threat wrapped together in heat and pressure that made her forget to breathe. She kissed him back with matching intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt, 3 years of loneliness and hunger and suppressed emotion pouring out in that single point of contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Damien's eyes were black with desire and something deeper, more dangerous. This changes things, he said quietly. I know, Claire whispered. We should probably talk about... The explosion of sound cut him off mid-sentence. Marcus burst through the door, his weapon drawn, his face tight with urgency. Sir, we have a problem. The security system just detected an intruder on the 42nd floor, armed and moving toward the penthouse. Damien's transformation was instantaneous. The desire vanished from his face, replaced by cold calculation. How many? At least 3, possibly more. They bypassed the elevators and came up through the service stairs. Lockdown protocol, now! Damien turned to Claire, gripping her shoulders. There's a safe room behind the bookshelf in my office. Marcus will take you there. You stay inside until I come for you personally, no one else. Do you understand? What about you? Claire asked, fear threading through her voice. I'll handle it. Damien released her, and she saw him reach under his wheelchair, pulling out a handgun that had been concealed there. Go, now. Marcus grabbed Claire's arm, pulling her toward the door, but she twisted back to look at Damien one last time. He met her eyes across the distance, and in that moment, Claire saw the man he truly was. Not the wheelchair-bound crime boss, not the strategic genius, but the predator he'd hidden beneath the facade of disability. Because Damian Cross stood up from his wheelchair with fluid grace, rolled his shoulders, and checked his weapon with the easy competence of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. And Claire realized with stunning clarity that whoever had come for him tonight had made a fatal error in judgment. They'd expected to find a crippled target. Instead, they'd found a wolf who'd been waiting for them to spring the trap. Marcus dragged Claire through the corridors at a dead run, his weapon drawn, his other hand locked around her wrist like iron. Behind them, Claire heard the distinctive crack of gunfire echoing through the penthouse, followed by shouts and the crash of breaking glass. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to help Damian somehow, but Marcus's grip was unbreakable. "Keep moving," he commanded, yanking her around a corner as bullets punched through the wall where they'd been standing seconds before. "The safe room is the only place you'll survive this." They burst into Damian's office, and Marcus immediately moved to the bookshelf, pressing a concealed button that made an entire section swing inward to reveal a steel-reinforced door. He punched in a code, pulled the door open, and shoved Claire inside. "Lock it behind me," he ordered. "Don't open it for anyone except Mr. Cross. Not me, not his men, not anyone. Only him." "Wait," Claire started, but Marcus was already gone, the door slamming shut with a heavy thud that spoke of serious engineering. She heard the automatic locks engage with multiple clicks, sealing her inside. The safe room was smaller than she'd expected, maybe 10 feet square, with monitors lining one wall showing security feeds from throughout the penthouse. Claire's hands shook as she watched the screen, searching for Damian among the chaos of armed men in muzzle flashes. There. On the monitor showing the main living area, she saw him. Damian moved through the space with lethal efficiency, no longer confined to his wheelchair, no longer pretending weakness. He fired with precision, dropped behind cover, rolled, and came up shooting. Every movement was fluid, practiced, deadly. This was who he really was beneath the facade. A warrior who'd spent 2 years letting the world think him broken while he rebuilt himself into something more dangerous than before. Claire watched 3 armed intruders go down in rapid succession. Damian's shots finding their targets with brutal accuracy. Marcus appeared from a side corridor, providing covering fire, while 2 more of Damian's security team converged from the opposite direction. The assault team, whoever they were, found themselves caught in a kill box they'd walked into blind. It was over in less than 3 minutes. The last intruder dropped, and sudden silence fell over the penthouse like a blanket. Claire pressed closer to the monitors, counting bodies, searching for Damian among the aftermath. He stood in the center of the carnage, breathing hard, his shirt torn and bloodied, though she couldn't tell if it was his blood or someone else's. Marcus approached him, speaking rapidly, and Damian nodded, holstering his weapon. Then his head tilted up, looking directly at the camera, and Claire realized he knew she was watching. He moved toward the office, and Claire's heart hammered as she waited. Footsteps approached the safe room door. A knock, 3 times, then twice, then once. Some kind of code. "Claire," Damian's voice came through the steel. "It's me. Open the door." Her hands trembled as she worked the locks, pulling the heavy door open. Damian stood on the other side, alive and whole, though his appearance was shocking. Blood spattered his face and clothing, his hair was disheveled, and there was a wild, dangerous energy radiating from him that made him look barely human. "Are you hurt?" Those were the first words out of Claire's mouth. "Not my blood." Damian stepped into the safe room, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. "Are you?" "No, I'm fine. Marcus got me here before." Claire's voice broke as the adrenaline finally caught up with her. "What happened? Who were they?" "Robert's people." Damian's voice was flat, emotionless. 3 professionals, former military by their tactics. They came for me while the security system was supposedly being upgraded, which means someone inside gave them the access codes and timing. Claire's stomach dropped. Robert really was the traitor. Yes. Damian pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages with blood-stained fingers. Marcus tracked his movements after the dinner. Robert went directly to a warehouse in the industrial district, one of Vincent's territories, interestingly enough. He met with the assault team there, gave them the codes, sent them here to finish what the bomb couldn't. His jaw tightened. "He's in custody now. My men picked him up 10 minutes ago." "What are you going to do with him?" Claire asked, though she already knew the answer. Damien's eyes met hers, dark and utterly merciless. What do you think I should do with someone who tried to kill me twice in 48 hours? Who endangered you in the process? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. This was a test, Claire realized. Damien was asking if she could accept what he was, what he did, the choices he made in this world she'd married into. Robert Chen was a dead man. The only question was whether Claire could live with being complicit in that execution. She thought about the man who'd sat at their dinner table radiating moral superiority, who'd criticized Damien's methods while planning his murder, who'd sent armed killers into their home without a thought for the innocent staff who might be caught in the crossfire. She thought about the moment Marcus had pulled her through bullets meant to ensure there were no witnesses. I think, Claire said slowly, choosing her words with care, that in your world, betrayal has only one consequence, and I think Robert understood that when he made his choice. She held Damien's gaze steadily. So do what you need to do. I won't stand in your way. Something shifted in Damien's expression, approval perhaps, or relief that she understood the rules of the game they were playing. He'll talk first. Tell us who else knew about his plans, who helped him, whether this was truly his operation or if he was working for someone else. He stepped closer, his bloodied hand coming up to cup her face. And then he'll die, Claire. I'll kill him myself for putting you in danger. The words should have horrified her. Instead, Claire felt a dark satisfaction curl in her chest. Good. Damien's eyes widened slightly, genuine surprise flickering across his features. Then he pulled her against him, kissing her hard and desperate, tasting of violence and victory and something primal that made Claire's blood sing. She kissed him back with equal intensity, her fingers tangling in his hair, both of them alive and whole when they could have been dead. When they finally broke apart, Damien rested his forehead against hers. I need to handle this. Robert's interrogation, cleanup, securing the building. It's going to take hours. I know. Claire's hand slid down to rest on his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath her palms. Do what you need to do. Will you be here when I'm done? The question was quiet, almost vulnerable. Where else would I go? Claire asked. This is my home now. You're my husband. I'm not going anywhere. Damien's arms tightened around her for a moment. Then he released her and stepped back, the crime lord's mask sliding back into place. Marcus will stay with you. Don't leave the penthouse. The building is secure, but I'm not taking chances. He left, and Claire sank onto the leather sofa in the safe room, her legs finally giving out. The monitor still showed the aftermath of the assault, bodies being removed, blood being cleaned, the evidence of violence being systematically erased. This was her life now. This was the world she'd chosen. And the terrifying thing was, she didn't regret it. The hours crawled by. Marcus brought her food she couldn't eat. Coffee, she sipped mechanically. Updates that Robert was still being interrogated in one of Damien's secure locations across the city. Dawn was breaking over the skyline when Damien finally returned, looking exhausted but grimly satisfied. It's done, he said simply, collapsing onto the sofa beside her. Robert talked. The operation was his alone. He thought removing me would let him reshape the organization into something more legitimate, more acceptable to his moral sensibilities. The arrogance of it is almost impressive. Was? Claire caught the past tense. Was. Damien's voice was flat. He won't be a problem anymore. Claire nodded, accepting this. And the organization? Will the others fall in line now? Oh, they'll fall in line. Damien's smile was sharp and cold. Because tomorrow night we're hosting another dinner. Vincent, Elena, and every senior lieutenant. And you're going to stand beside me when I tell them exactly what happened to Robert and why. You're going to be my partner in making sure everyone understands that betrayal ends in death, and that you are under my complete protection. Claire's pulse quickened. You want me to be part of the message. I want them to see us as a united front, husband and wife, partners, equals. Damien turned to face her fully. Robert saw you as an innocent civilian, a weakness he could exploit. I want everyone to know you're anything but. Can you do that? Claire thought about the girl she'd been just days ago, invisible, powerless, scrubbing floors in a basement. Then she thought about the woman she was becoming, someone who could sit at a table with criminals and hold her own, who could watch violence unfold and not flinch, who could accept the brutal justice of her husband's world without losing herself. Yes, she said firmly. I can do that. The next evening, Claire dressed in black. A deliberate choice, the color of mourning and power in equal measure. The dress was elegant, expensive, and utterly uncompromising. She wore her hair down, diamond earrings that caught the light, and an expression of calm confidence she'd practiced in the mirror until it looked natural. The dining room was set for 10 this time, and the atmosphere was thick with tension when the guests arrived. Vincent came first, his scarred face carefully neutral, though his eyes darted around the room as if expecting an ambush. Elena followed, immaculate as always, her ice-blue eyes taking in every detail with calculating precision. The others filed in, senior lieutenants, key players, all of them clearly aware that something significant was about to happen. The empty chair where Robert had sat at the previous dinner was a silent accusation. Damien sat at the head of the table in his wheelchair, the illusion of disability firmly back in place. Claire took her position at his right hand, her spine straight, her expression serene. She was learning to wear masks almost as well as her husband. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Damien began, his voice carrying absolute authority despite its conversational tone. "I imagine you're wondering about Robert's absence." The room went utterly still. "Robert Chen is dead," Damien continued matter-of-factly. "He was the traitor who planted the bomb at the charity gala and who sent an assault team into my home last night. He believed I was weak, believed he could remove me and reshape this organization according to his vision of moral purity." Damien's smile was cold as winter. He was wrong. Vincent's face had gone pale. Elena's expression remained perfectly controlled, but Claire saw her fingers tighten almost imperceptibly on her wineglass. "I want to be very clear about something," Damien said, his voice dropping to something quiet and deadly. "This organization exists because of loyalty. Loyalty to me, loyalty to each other, loyalty to the code we all live by. Robert forgot that. He put his personal beliefs above the collective good, and he paid the price." He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the fear build. "But Robert made another mistake," Damien continued, and his hand found Claire's on the table, lacing their fingers together. "He saw my wife as a weakness, as a civilian caught in circumstances beyond her control, as someone who could be threatened or eliminated without consequence." His eyes swept the table, making contact with each person in turn. "He couldn't have been more wrong. Claire's my partner in every sense of the word. She has my complete trust, my complete protection, and my complete authority to act on my behalf. Any disrespect shown to her is disrespect shown to me. Any threat against her is a threat against me. And we all saw how threats against me are handled." Claire felt every eye in the room focus on her with new intensity. She met their stares calmly, channeling every ounce of strength she'd developed during 3 years of surviving Margaret's cruelty. "Mrs. Cross," Vincent said carefully, and Claire heard the shift in his tone, from dismissive to respectful. "I want to assure you that I had no knowledge of Robert's plans. If I had known, you would have come to Damien immediately," Claire finished for him, her voice steady and sure. "Because you understand loyalty. You understand that this organization is stronger together than divided." She paused, remembering the advice she'd given at the previous dinner. "You value tradition and hierarchy, Vincent. That's admirable. But tradition only survives when those who uphold it adapt to changing circumstances." Vincent blinked, clearly surprised to be engaged so directly. "Yes, ma'am. Exactly." Elena spoke next, her Russian accent slightly more pronounced than usual. "If I may, Mrs. Cross, I would like to extend my congratulations on your marriage, and my assurance of complete loyalty, both to your husband and to you." Her ice-blue eyes were unreadable. "In my culture, we have a saying, the strength of the wolf is the pack, and the strength of the pack is the wolf. You and Mr. Cross together make this organization stronger." It was a calculated statement, Claire realized, Elena positioning herself as an ally, distancing herself from Robert's betrayal, making sure everyone knew where she stood. "Smart." "Thank you, Elena," Claire said with a slight smile. "I appreciate that." The rest of the dinner proceeded with careful formality, everyone speaking respectfully, acknowledging both Damien and Claire as leaders. The message had been received and understood. The organization had a new power structure, and Claire was firmly part of it. When the guests finally departed, Claire felt the tension drain from her shoulders. She'd done it. She'd stood before dangerous people and claimed her place among them without flinching. "You were perfect," Damien said, wheeling himself closer. "Vincent will spread the word that you're to be respected. Elena will do the same, but with more calculation. By tomorrow, everyone in the organization will know that Claire Cross is not to be underestimated." "Good," Claire said, and meant it. Damien reached for her hand, pulling her down until she was sitting on his lap, the wheelchair supporting both their weights. "I have something for you." He pulled a folder from beneath his jacket, handing it to her. Claire opened it with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning the legal documents inside. Property deeds, bank statements, corporate ownership papers, all in her name. "What is this?" she whispered. "Your insurance policy." Damien's arms wrapped around her waist, holding her close. "The Holloway mansion and everything Margaret stole from you, I bought it all back. The house, your father's company, even the art and antiques she sold off. It's all yours again, legally and completely. If anything happens to me, you'll have resources, security, the ability to build whatever life you want." Claire's eyes burned with unshed tears as she stared at the documents. Her home, her inheritance, everything she'd thought lost forever, returned to her like a gift from the universe. "But that's not all," Damien continued quietly. "The mansion is yours, but Margaret and Sabrina are still living there. I wanted to give you the pleasure of removing them yourself." Claire's head snapped up, meeting his dark eyes. "You want me to evict them?" "I want you to reclaim what's yours." Damien's smile was sharp. "With me beside you, if you want. Or alone, if you'd prefer. Either way, it's time for Margaret Holloway to face the consequences of 3 years of cruelty." The next morning, Claire stood at the gates of the Holloway mansion with Damien beside her, standing, not sitting in his wheelchair, though Marcus and several security personnel surrounded them to maintain the illusion for anyone watching. The house looked exactly as she remembered, beautiful and cold, the place where her childhood had died. "Ready?" Damien asked quietly. Claire straightened her spine, lifting her chin. "Yes." They walked up the front steps together, and Claire used the key from the deed packet to open the door she'd once been forbidden to enter through. The grand foyer was exactly as she remembered. Marble floors, sweeping staircase, the chandelier her mother had loved hanging overhead. "Who's there?" Margaret's voice echoed from upstairs. "I told you people to use the service entrance." Claire smiled coldly. "It's not the service, Margaret. It's me." The silence that followed was absolute. Then footsteps on the stairs, rapid and angry, and Margaret appeared at the landing in a silk robe, her face flushed with rage. "How dare you come here? I'll call the police. She stopped dead when she saw Damien standing beside Claire, his hand resting possessively on her waist. The color drained from Margaret's face. "Mr. Cross, I didn't realize you would be here." "Didn't you?" Damien's voice was pleasant, which somehow made it more terrifying. "This is my wife's home, Mrs. Holloway. Where else would I be?" "Her home?" Margaret's laugh was shrill. "This is my house. Claire has no claim." "Actually," Claire interrupted, pulling the deed from her purse, "I have every claim. This house belonged to my father. When he died, it should have passed to me as his only biological child. You stole it through legal manipulation and fraud. But Damien bought it back from the bank that held the mortgage you couldn't pay, and then he gave it to me." She held up the deed, letting Margaret see her name in clear legal language. "That's impossible," Margaret whispered, but Claire could see the truth dawning in her stepmother's eyes. "You can't." "I can, and I have." Claire's voice was steady, strong, nothing like the trembling girl who'd scrubbed these floors. "You have 1 hour to pack your belongings and leave. Anything that belonged to my mother or father stays. Everything else goes with you." Sabrina appeared at the top of the stairs, her face puffy from sleep. "Mom, what's going on?" "We're being evicted," Margaret spat. "Your darling stepsister and her criminal husband are throwing us out." "Criminal?" Damien's smile was razor sharp. "Careful, Mrs. Holloway. Slander is actionable, and I have very good lawyers. Besides, I prefer the term businessman with diversified interests." He glanced at his watch. "You now have 59 minutes. "This isn't fair," Sabrina shrieked, stumbling down the stairs. "Claire, you can't do this." We gave you a home when you had nothing. You gave me a basement room and 3 years of servitude, Claire corrected coldly. You erased me, humiliated me, treated me like property, and now you're experiencing what it feels like to lose everything. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to something quiet and venomous. How does it feel, Sabrina, to have your security ripped away? To realize you're powerless? Sabrina's face crumpled. Please, we have nowhere to go. You should have thought of that before you poured wine on my dress and laughed while your friends watched. Claire felt no sympathy, no mercy. You should have thought of it before you let your mother beat me and said nothing. You should have thought of it before you ran away from your own wedding and left me to take your place. She turned away, dismissing Sabrina's tears as easily as Sabrina had once dismissed her pain. Margaret's voice stopped her before she reached the door. You think you've won? You think marrying a mobster makes you better than us? You're nothing, Claire. You'll always be nothing. And when he gets tired of you, when he trades you in for someone younger or prettier or more useful, you'll have nothing again. Claire turned slowly, meeting her stepmother's hateful gaze with perfect calm. I survived 3 years of your worst. I survived your cruelty, your manipulation, your systematic destruction of everything I loved, and I came out stronger. She moved closer, close enough to see the fear beneath Margaret's bravado. Damien didn't make me strong. You did. Every slap, every insult, every moment of humiliation taught me how to endure, how to survive, how to wait for my moment. She smiled, and it was her husband's smile, cold and sharp and absolutely merciless. So thank you, Margaret, for making me into someone who could stand here today and destroy you without a second thought. Margaret's face went white, then red, her hands shaking with impotent fury. But there was nothing she could say, nothing she could do. The power she'd wielded so viciously was gone, stripped away as completely as she'd once stripped away Claire's dignity. 55 minutes, Damien said pleasantly. I'd start packing if I were you. They left Margaret and Sabrina standing in the foyer, stunned and powerless, and walked through the house together. Claire moved through rooms filled with memories, her mother's sitting room, her father's study, the library where she'd spent countless hours reading. Damien had been thorough. Every piece of furniture, every painting, every item that had belonged to her family was back in its rightful place, restored as if the last 3 years had never happened. Except Claire had happened. She'd been forged in fire and emerged as something her younger self never could have imagined. How do you feel? Damien asked as they stood in her mother's sitting room, surrounded by delicate furniture and soft colors. Free, Claire said honestly. For the first time in 3 years, completely free. Damien pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. What do you want to do with this place? Claire thought about that question carefully. This house held ghosts, her mother's laughter, her father's pride, but also Margaret's cruelty and 3 years of pain. I want to transform it, turn it into something good, something that helps people who are powerless like I was. Like what? Damien's voice was curious, not dismissive. A foundation, a safe house for women escaping abuse, a place where invisible people can become visible again. Claire turned in his arms, meeting his dark eyes. I survived because I was strong enough to endure alone, but not everyone is. Some people need help, need protection, need someone to believe they're worth saving. Damien studied her face for a long moment, and Claire saw something shift in his expression, pride maybe, or love, or something too complex to name. Then we'll do it. Transform this house into a foundation, hire staff, provide resources, make it the best facility in the city. He paused, his hand coming up to cup her face. You'll be brilliant at it, turning pain into purpose. They sealed the promise with a kiss, standing in her mother's sitting room while Margaret and Sabrina packed their belongings upstairs, the old life dying to make room for something new. True to their word, they left exactly 1 hour later. Claire watched from the window as Margaret and Sabrina loaded suitcases into a taxi, their faces tight with humiliation and rage. She felt no triumph, no joy, just a quiet satisfaction that justice had been served, that the scales had finally balanced. The mansion was hers again. Her life was hers again. And standing beside Damien Cross, she was more than just his wife. She was his partner, his equal, someone who'd earned her place in his dangerous world through strength and intelligence rather than accident of birth. Over the following weeks, Claire threw herself into transforming the mansion. She hired architects to redesign the space, brought in counselors and social workers to develop programs, established a legal fund to help women escape abusive situations. The Holloway Foundation, she called it, honoring her father's name while reclaiming her own identity. Damien supported every decision, providing funding and protection, using his connections to ensure the foundation had everything it needed. But he never tried to control it, never questioned her choices. This was hers, and he respected that boundary absolutely. Meanwhile, Claire continued her education in Damien's world. She learned to shoot with Marcus, became proficient enough to handle herself in dangerous situations. She sat in on business meetings, contributed strategic insights, became known throughout the organization as someone whose intelligence matched her husband's. Vincent learned to respect her judgment. Elena learned to value her input. The entire hierarchy adjusted to accommodate the reality of Claire Cross as a power in her own right. And at night, when the business was handled and the masks could come off, Claire and Damien built something neither of them had expected. A genuine partnership, a marriage that was more than convenience or strategy. They learned each other's scars, shared each other's nightmares, found comfort in the knowledge that they'd both survived the worst the world could throw at them and emerged stronger. 6 months after their wedding, Claire stood in the grand ballroom of the newly renovated Holloway Foundation, surrounded by reporters and city officials, cutting the ribbon for the official opening. Damien stood beside her, walking now, his wheelchair abandoned as the secret of his mobility slowly became public knowledge through carefully managed revelations. He'd decided that maintaining the deception was less valuable than standing beside his wife as an equal, and Claire loved him more for that choice than for any gift he'd given her. "Mrs. Cross," a reporter called out, "some people have criticized your foundation, given your husband's business interests. What do you say to those who question your motives?" Claire met the camera's eye directly, her voice calm and sure. "I say that everyone deserves a chance to rebuild their life, regardless of where they come from or what circumstances brought them to our door. This foundation exists to help women who've been made invisible by abuse, by poverty, by systems that failed them. We don't judge. We help." She paused, her hand finding Damien's. "And yes, my husband's resources help fund this work. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm grateful for it. Because without his support, these women would have nowhere to go." The reporter started to ask another question, but Victoria Ashford appeared at Claire's elbow, immaculate as always. "I think that's enough questions for today. Mrs. Cross has actual work to do, unlike those of us who simply write about it." The reporters laughed and the crowd began to disperse, moving toward the refreshment tables Claire's staff had prepared. Victoria lingered, her sharp eyes assessing Claire with the same intensity as their first meeting. "You've come a long way from that terrified bride at the charity gala," Victoria observed. "I was never terrified," Claire corrected gently. "Just uncertain. There's a difference." Victoria's smile was genuine. "Indeed. Well, you've made quite an impression on this city, Mrs. Cross. The foundation is brilliant. Your work with your husband's organization is the subject of considerable speculation, and you've become something of a legend among the women you've helped." She paused. "I'd love to do a feature story. The transformation of Claire Holloway into Claire Cross. From invisible to undeniable." Claire considered the offer carefully. A year ago, the idea of publicity would have terrified her. But she'd learned that visibility was power, that being seen meant being taken seriously. "All right," she agreed, "but I want editorial approval, and any proceeds from the article go to the foundation." "Done." Victoria extended her hand and Claire shook it, sealing the agreement. As the evening wound down and the guests departed, Claire found herself alone with Damien in the ballroom, surrounded by the transformed space where she'd once been a servant. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Your mother would be proud," Damien said quietly, pulling her into his arms. "Turning pain into something beautiful. That takes strength most people don't have." "I learned from you," Claire replied. "You turned weakness into a weapon. I'm just following your example." "No." Damien's hand came up to tilt her face toward his. "You're creating your own path. I gave you tools, maybe, and protection. But this?" He gestured at the foundation around them. "This is all you, Claire. Your vision, your strength, your refusal to let the past define your future." Claire kissed him, pouring 3 years of gratitude and 6 months of growing love into the contact. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing I was worth saving." "Thank you," Damien countered, "for choosing to stay when you could have run, for becoming my partner instead of my victim, for making me believe that something good could come from the empire I built on violence and fear." They stood together in the empty ballroom, two broken people who'd found wholeness in each other, who'd built something real from a foundation of lies and necessity. The past was behind them. Margaret and Sabrina living in a small apartment across the city, powerless and forgotten. Robert Chen buried and unmourned, the organization stronger than ever under their joint leadership. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but no longer frightening. Claire had her foundation, her purpose, her power. Damien had his empire and a wife who understood the cost of maintaining it. Together, they had something neither had ever expected to find, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared strength, and the bone-deep knowledge that they'd survived the worst and emerged unbreakable. Claire Holloway, the invisible girl who'd scrubbed floors and endured humiliation, was gone forever. In her place stood Claire Cross, philanthropist, strategist, partner to the most dangerous man in the city, and a woman who'd learned that true power came not from avoiding the darkness, but from walking through it and emerging with your soul intact. And as she stood in the ballroom with her husband's arms around her and her mother's dream transformed into reality, Claire realized that sometimes the greatest revenge wasn't destruction. It was survival. It was transformation. It was taking everything that had been stolen and building something better from the ashes. Margaret had tried to erase her. Instead, she'd created someone unforgettable. Sabrina had tried to use her. Instead, she'd lost everything while Claire gained a kingdom. And Damien Cross, the man who'd seen her worth when she was invisible, had given her the tools to become extraordinary. The story that had begun with a desperate substitution at a wedding altar had evolved into something neither of them could have predicted. A genuine partnership, a love forged in fire, and a shared empire built on the ruins of what they'd both lost. Claire had started as nobody, nothing, a ghost in her own life. She ended as someone who commanded respect, wielded power, and transformed pain into purpose. The invisible heiress had become undeniable, and she would never be erased again.